Chapter 1. The Sleepless Struggle. The night had always been a shroud, a quiet time meant for dreams and rest, a sanctuary from the world's tumultuous dance. Yet for James, a man of few words and many sleepless nights, it was a tormentor, an unsolvable riddle, a purveyor of a solitude he never sought. James was a man of modest stature and quiet demeanor. His thick-rimmed glasses sat firmly on the bridge of his nose, providing an intellectual yet weary air to his pale, unshaven face. He was in his early 30s, although the dark bags under his eyes and the premature gray streaks in his hair were testament to the toll the persistent insomnia had taken on him. His exhaustion was etched into the fine lines creasing his forehead and the downturned corners of his mouth, painting a picture of a man engaged in a long, arduous battle with the demons of sleeplessness. James, Dr. William, the lead scientist, called, his voice echoing through the sterile hallway of the Sleep Institute. He blinked behind his glasses, shaking off the reverie before standing up and following Dr. William into a room filled with advanced medical equipment humming in background. The room smelled of antiseptic and something metallic, the ubiquitous smell of science and clinical sterility. James' heart pounded in his chest as he took in his new surroundings. The insomnia had held him in its merciless grip for years now. It was a relentless beast, reducing every night into an agonizing stretch of endless minutes and hours, mocking his futile attempts to surrender to rest. His life had been dominated by this elusive quest for sleep, every moment underscored by a desperate longing for the sweet oblivion that it offered. A flicker of hope ignited within him at the prospect of this sleep study. He yearned for release, for an answer, a panacea that would rid him of his nocturnal torment. He thought of all the times he lay awake in his cold, silent apartment, staring at the mocking hands of the clock as they ticked away into the night, leaving him behind in a sleepless abyss. Dr. William explained the various procedures of the sleep study, his voice a steady monotone that echoed in the vast room. James listened, his mind latching onto the promises of understanding his condition, his disorder, his personal nightmare. With a deep breath, he signed the consent form. His hand was steady, yet his mind raced with countless possibilities, thousands of maybes. Was this it? Was this where the relentless cycle of sleepless nights ended? A glimmer of desperation, disguised as hope, sparked in his tired eyes. Maybe this was indeed the first step towards finally reclaiming the night, towards regaining his lost sense of normality. For James, it was more than just a study. It was a gamble, a leap of faith into the vast unknown, a desperate plea to the universe for an escape from the torturous labyrinth of insomnia. And he was willing to stake it all, his very existence, on the elusive promise of a night filled with dreams, with sleep, with peace. Chapter 2. The Waking Nightmare. James' life hadn't always been this desolate dance with insomnia. There was a time, not so long ago, when the night brought comfort, not torment, when dreams were an escape, not a cruel, unreachable oasis. Born and raised in a quaint little town of Whitby, he was the eldest of 3 siblings. His life a melange of community gatherings, annual fishing trips, and the small joys that come with a close-knit family. He had a promising career in journalism, his articles admired for their insight and honesty. He was known to possess a keen eye for detail and a flair for the written word. However, as his late 20s rolled in, so did the first signs of his insomnia. Initially, it was the odd sleepless night here and there, easily dismissed as stress or overwork. But those single nights soon turned into entire weeks, casting a long, ominous shadow over his once fulfilling life. The first casualty of his condition was his job. His performance, once praised, began to decline due to his chronic exhaustion. The tight deadlines became impossible to meet. The previously vibrant world he described through his articles dulled and unfocused. He eventually quit, deciding to focus on his deteriorating health. His relationships didn't fare any better. He drifted apart from his longtime girlfriend, their conversations devolving into exasperated pleas and unfulfilled promises of seeking help. His parents and siblings, though supportive, could only do so much from a distance. The once lively family gatherings became tense and strained, the ghost of his ailment a constant, unwanted guest. His entire life began to revolve around this elusive quest for sleep. His nights an endless symphony of tossing and turning, his days an unbearable haze of fatigue. The impact was devastating, eroding the foundation of his life, leaving him a mere shell of the man he used to be. When he learned about Dr. William's sleep study, he saw it as a lifeline, an opportunity to regain control of his life, to finally face the monster that was his insomnia. Every aspect of his life, every relationship he cherished, every ambition he nurtured hinged on this one hope. The study wasn't just a medical experiment for him. It was a battleground, a fight to reclaim his life. Dr. Williams' reputation in the field of sleep disorders was renowned, and the cutting-edge nature of his research filled James with a desperate sense of hope. If anyone could help him fight this battle, it was Dr. William and his team. As he entered the Sleep Institute, his heart heavy with fear and anticipation, he clung on to this last hope. He was willing to bare his soul, to confront the deepest, darkest corners of his sleepless mind if it meant a chance at normalcy. And so James stepped into the fray, ready to face his nightmare, ready to wage a war for his dreams, for his sleep, for his life. Chapter 3. The Silent Citadel. The Sleep Institute was an imposing edifice, its stark modern architecture in stark contrast to the surrounding old-world charm of the quiet university town. Its glass exterior mirrored the cloudy sky, making the building appear as an enormous, ominous monolith. As James approached, he could feel an icy chill crawl up his spine, like a foreboding whisper in the wind. The interior of the institute was no less daunting. The walls were a sterile white, as were the floors, with the odd splash of harsh fluorescent light reflecting off polished surfaces. The air held a faint medicinal smell, mingling with the scent of new furniture and recently cleaned carpets. Everything was arranged with surgical precision, embodying the very essence of clinical sterility. The facility was eerily quiet, save for the soft hum of the central heating and the occasional muffled footsteps echoing through the expansive corridors. Each hallway seemed to stretch into oblivion, its endpoint lost in an immaculate white haze. Unique characteristics of the facility only heightened its air of mystery. Its windows, James noticed, were sealed, the glass fogged to prevent a view of the outside world. Time, it seemed, was an expendable commodity within these walls. There were no clocks to be seen, only an endless expanse of unblemished white walls and the periodic thrum of machinery from behind closed doors. The very heart of the institute, where the study was to be conducted, was a large, isolated room. The room was as sterile as the rest of the facility, the same blinding white walls enclosing a space filled with minimalist furnishings. But what set it apart were the countless wires snaking their way across the room, connecting various pieces of machinery and culminating in a central console replete with monitors and dials. A sense of impending significance hung heavy in the air, the quiet hum of machinery like a pulsating heartbeat in the silence. As James took in the details of his surroundings, he couldn't shake off a sense of apprehension. His hopes for a cure were now intertwined with a growing curiosity. His journalist instincts piqued by the enigma that was the Sleep Institute. The setting was disconcerting, yes, but it was also intriguing. The sterile sterility, the labyrinthine layout, the muffled silence, they all felt part of an elaborate puzzle, a puzzle he was determined to unravel. As he was escorted towards the central room, James steeled himself for what lay ahead. This institute, with all its peculiarities, was his battleground. Every sterile wall, every sealed window, every faceless clock marked the contours of his upcoming struggle. As the doors to the room swung open, James stepped into the epicenter of his war against insomnia, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and resolute determination. His journey into the depths of his waking nightmare was about to begin. Chapter 4. The Gathering of Shadows. James was escorted through a labyrinth of white, washed corridors before being introduced to the communal dining and kitchen area. A stark contrast to the rest of the facility, this space was awash with vibrant colors, the air holding a tantalizing aroma of freshly brewed coffee and baked bread. Various participants were already scattered about, their forms silhouetted against the soft light filtering through the room. In one corner, a group of younger participants chattered animatedly, their laughter echoing like bells in the morning light. By the windows, a pair of middle-aged women sat in comfortable silence, their eyes following the dance of steam rising from their mugs. A man, perhaps in his late 40s, sat alone at the far end of the room, his face half hidden behind a thick book. A few other figures, blurred at the edges of James' vision, moved aimlessly around the room. Taking a moment, James studied the group, his journalist instincts buzzing. Each participant seemed wrapped in their own cocoon of thoughts and worries, their reasons for partaking in the study as diverse as their personalities. The youngsters exuded an air of carefree curiosity, perhaps viewing this as an adventurous leap into the unknown. The women by the window appeared resigned, their worn-out eyes suggesting years of sleepless nights and unfulfilled hopes. The solitary man in the corner intrigued James the most. There was an inscrutable veil over his features that hinted at a deeper, darker struggle with insomnia. As he navigated through the room, his initial thoughts of his fellow participants were pinned down mentally, forming the first draft of the chronicles of this experiment. His insomnia had always felt like a lonely battle, but standing here, surrounded by others who shared his affliction, he felt a strange camaraderie. It was as if they were soldiers drafted into the same war, united by their shared suffering, even as they each harbored their own secrets and fear. "Welcome to the lion's den," a voice sounded behind him, the friendly just at odds with the gravity of their situation. James turned around to face a young woman, her eyes bright with a humor that didn't quite reach them. She extended a hand. "I'm Lily." James took her hand, the corners of his lips curving into a small smile. The wheels of the experiment had started turning, the first threads of their shared narrative beginning to weave together. The coming days promised mystery, challenge, and an uncharted journey into the realm of sleep. For now, though, they were just strangers in a room, bound together by their invisible chains of sleepless nights. As the day wore on, the lines of their individual stories would start to blur, merging into the shared tapestry of their sleep study. The stage was set, the characters ready, the curtain was rising on their shared drama. The story of the sleepless had begun. Chapter 5. The Tapestry of Dreams. James found himself subtly absorbed in the dance of personalities unfolding before him. It was as if he had walked into a living, breathing art gallery, each participant a unique masterpiece with its own story, color, and texture. The youngsters, Adam and Belle, were university students drawn to the study out of a mix of academic curiosity and the promise of monetary compensation. Adam was an extroverted sociology major with a mop of ginger hair, freckles spread across his face like constellations. He had an infectious energy that permeated the room, his laughter contagious, his eyes alight with mischievous intent. Belle, a psychology student, was his polar opposite. She was an introvert, her pixie-cut hair and glasses giving her a scholarly demeanor. Her quiet, contemplative nature hinted at a depth that went beyond her years. The women by the window, Anna and Greta, were longtime friends who had battled insomnia together. Anna was a high school teacher who carried a soft-spoken gentleness about her. The way she caressed the handle of her mug, her fingers lingering, suggested a deep-seated longing for the comfort of sleep. Greta, on the other hand, was a retired nurse, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Her stoic exterior, which had been hardened by years of sleep deprivation, masked an undercurrent of anxiety. Then there was Samuel, the man engrossed in his book. He was a reclusive writer, his dark hair graying at the temples. He barely acknowledged anyone, seeming almost ghost-like in his detachment. His eyes, perpetually rimmed with fatigue, were nevertheless sharp, scrutinizing the world around him through a lens only he could understand. Two other participants were Lucy, a stand-up comedian with an infectious laughter and an eternally hopeful aura, and Julian, a stockbroker with a nervous energy that seemed to bubble under his skin, always glancing at a watch that was no longer there. Each of them was unique, a distinct color in the spectrum of insomnia. The way they moved, their habits, their laughter and silence, all painted a vivid picture of their internal battles. James watched, absorbed, his journalist instincts taking mental notes. This was not just a sleep study, he realized. This was a human study, a deep dive into the psychology of sleep deprivation. Little did he know, the descent had just begun. The study had yet to unveil its cruel reality. Chapter 6. Dining in Disquiet. The moment the participants gathered around the sterile stainless steel table for their first communal meal was akin to the first few discordant notes of an unrehearsed symphony. The atmosphere was pregnant with tension and unease, all wrapped up in an awkward silence that hung over them like a weighty cloud. The room buzzed with unspoken apprehension. The clinking of cutlery against the plates an uneasy melody. The awkward stillness seemed to mute the sounds of their heartbeats, the very air filled with anticipation as if holding its breath. Their shadows, cast by the harsh fluorescent light overhead, danced on the cold, tiled floor as if mocking their forced camaraderie. Belle was the first to break the silence. "How are you all feeling?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, like she feared her words might shatter the fragile tranquility. The question echoed in the silent room, met with cautious glances and mumbled responses. Adam offered a cheerful grin. The words excited, I suppose, escaping his lips, but the falsity of his optimism was apparent in his wavering tone. The meal progressed with halting attempts at conversation. Samuel offered terse one-word responses, while Greta mainly nodded, her gaze often straying towards the obscured windows. Lucy tried to inject some of her usual humor into the atmosphere, but even her laughter seemed to bounce off the cold walls, leaving a hollow echo in its wake. James found himself watching, almost dissociating from the scene. He picked at his food, his thoughts as unpalatable as the insipid meal before him. His gaze met Julian's, the latter's eyes mirroring the unease he himself felt. Julian cleared his throat, about to speak, but his words hung mid-air, swallowed by the silence. Their shared meal, an event that should have been comforting in its shared humanity, was anything but. It was a stark reminder of their individual battles with insomnia, a fight now laid bare on a shared battlefield. Each mumbled word, each forced smile was a testament to their underlying fears and the uncertainty they harbored about the impending experiment. This was the calm before the storm, an eerie silence pervading the room, as if whispering of the tumultuous events yet to come. Chapter 7. The Arrival of Dr. William. In the library area of the facility, a sanctum of silent anticipation was taking shape. The scattered chairs, the scattered minds, the scattered fears, all mirrored the participants' chaotic inner worlds as they anxiously awaited the arrival of the man in charge, the one they'd been told would have all the answers. This was the stage upon which they had been set, a set of mismatched, uncomfortable chairs scattered around a sleek glass table, a library whose books offered no escapism, only clinical sterility and unease. The sealed windows allowed no glimpse of the outside world, while the clockless walls added to the illusion of timelessness. Their apprehension was palpable, so tangible that you could cut through it with a knife. Hushed whispers traveled through the room, getting lost in the high ceiling, disappearing into nothingness just like their unsaid fears. Samuel was fiddling with his glasses. Greta was staring blankly at the books. Lucy was pacing, and Belle was tracing patterns on the glass table. Each participant a story untold, a worry unshared, a fear unspoken. And then the room fell into absolute silence as the door swung open. Dr. William made his entrance, an imposing figure in a crisp white lab coat, his silver hair gleaming under the overhead lights. His stride was measured, his gaze piercing. One look and it was apparent that he was a man of science, a man of purpose. Dr. William's aura was both unsettling and intriguing. He carried an air of authority and knowledge, yet there was something about him that suggested an unspeakable secret, a labyrinth of mysteries waiting to be unraveled. His eyes, though masked behind a pair of spectacles, were unreadable, enigmatic, as though hiding behind an impenetrable fortress. His lips turned into a thin line, or pulled tight, as though holding back 1,000 words. The room seemed to shrink under his presence, the atmosphere getting heavier with each step he took. As he pulled up a chair and sat down, the glass table separating him from the participants felt more like an ocean of uncertainty. The first meeting with Dr. William had begun, and the storm was about to break loose. The air, thick with tension and bristling with unspoken fears, told a tale of the uncertain path that lay ahead, an odyssey they were all unwittingly a part of. Chapter 8. Unveiling the Rules. As the last echoes of his entrance ebbed away, Dr. William cleared his throat. The sound seemed to reverberate in the room, bouncing off the sterile white walls, creating a sense of disquiet in the already nervous participants. He removed his glasses, cleaning them meticulously with a handkerchief, further drawing out the suspense. The calm before the storm. "Welcome, participants," he finally began, his voice ringing out with a composed authority that sent an eerie chill down everyone's spine. He leaned back in his chair, hands folded over his abdomen as he carefully scanned the faces around him. "Before we begin the experiment, there are certain rules and guidelines we must address." The room tensed, the atmosphere thickening with the weight of his words. The unreadable spectacles were back on his face, casting a veil of secrecy over his gaze as he delved into the rules of the impending sleep study. He explained the structure meticulously. There would be no access to clocks, no indication of the passing of time. Meals would be served at irregular intervals, further obscuring their sense of day and night. Regular checkups would ensure their physical well-being during the experiment. But it was the word sleeplessness that echoed the loudest in the room, hanging in the air like a specter. "No participant," Dr. William continued, his voice steady, "will be allowed to sleep during the duration of the experiment." A gasp traveled around the room, eyes widened, and whispers rustled like autumn leaves. The enormity of the experiment began to dawn on the participants, their hearts pounding in their chests like wild drums. "Wait, what's the duration of this study?" Samuel broke the silence, his voice quivering slightly, betraying the fear that his face tried to mask. A ripple of nods and murmurs of agreement spread across the room. The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Dr. William offered a non-committal smile, devoid of warmth, and brushed off the question with a disconcerting ease. "We will determine the duration based on our observations and the progress of the experiment." The room descended into a hushed silence again, the only sound being the whispers of apprehension swirling around like ghostly apparitions. The cage had been set, the rules dictated. All that was left was for the unsuspecting participants to step into the labyrinth of sleeplessness, their dreams held hostage to the hands of unseen observers. Chapter 9. Unleashing the Wakefulness. After the lingering silence had seeped into every corner of the room, Dr. William resumed, his words weaving a tapestry of intrigue. "Now, let's address the key element of our experiment, the gas." As if on cue, a metallic canister placed on the table next to him glinted under the harsh fluorescent lights. It was hooked up to a complex system of tubes and dials, a technological snake wrapped around a sleek steel body. A murmur of unease ran through the room. Eyes flicked from the canister to the doctor and back again, uncertainty creeping into their faces. Dr. William, oblivious to their apprehension, continued with a grim fascination dancing in his eyes. "The gas," he began, "is a proprietary blend developed by our team. It's designed to promote wakefulness, suppressing the need for sleep. Its effects are temporary and wear off after a certain period." The room held its breath. Curiosity wrestled with fear in their expressions, eyes trained on the innocuous-looking canister. Dr. Williams' fingers glided over the sleek metal surface as he spoke of the gas's properties, his voice filled with a reverence that only deepened the participants' unease. "Some of you," he continued, the corners of his mouth quirking into a mirthless smile, "might feel a surge of energy, heightened awareness, even euphoria. But these are simply the initial effects. As your body adjusts to the gas, these sensations will lessen." Questions flew like arrows in the room, their skepticism giving voice to the dread that had settled deep within their bones. "And the side effects?" asked Maria, her eyes narrowed suspiciously. The room filled with nods and murmurs of agreement, each participant clinging to her question like a lifeline. The doctor shrugged. "The effects are varied based on the individual's physical and mental constitution," he said, his voice steady as he adeptly navigated the rising tide of unease. "Rest assured, we will be closely monitoring your health throughout the experiment." His words were meant to offer solace, but they seemed to echo in the room like a knell, only amplifying their fears. The participants exchanged glances, looks of skepticism, anxiety, curiosity, all mashed into a silent conversation that spoke volume. They were stepping into the unknown, their fears giving way to the primal instinct of survival. Little did they know, the real game was just about to begin. Chapter 10. The First Breath of Sleeplessness. The clock had hit midnight when the room's hum shifted into a deeper, ominous timbre. A momentary silence fell over the facility before the room was infiltrated by a faint hiss. Participants paused their conversations, their heads tilting slightly as if trying to decipher this new soundtrack. From the canister hooked to the walls, a translucent gas began to seep into the room. It had no smell, no taste, but its presence was immediately felt. Like a whisper, it curled around their bodies, invading their space as it stretched and grew, blanketing the entire room. A wave of apprehension swelled within the participants. It rippled through the room, reaching James, who sat apart, observing the proceedings. The tendrils of the gas snaked around his feet, rising gradually. It felt no different than regular air, but knowing what it was meant to do filled him with a sense of surrealism. His chest tightened, the anticipation coiling within him like a spring. Around him, he saw similar expressions mirrored on the faces of his companions. Eyes wide with apprehension, bodies rigid, as if expecting the gas to strike like a hidden viper. Their breaths became shallow, syncing with the room's new rhythm, the hiss of the gas becoming the metronome to their mounting anxiety. Nervous chuckles broke out, an attempt to defuse the tension, but it did little to assuage the undercurrent of fear that buzzed through the room. It was real now, the study, no longer a distant concept discussed in the stark cold of the library. It was here, in the air they breathed, the reality they had willingly embraced. James felt the effects subtly at first. A sharpening of his senses, a sudden lightness in his head. It was as if a veil had been lifted and he was seeing the world in a clearer, crisper light. His heartbeat quickened in response, a pounding drum echoing his alarm and excitement. As the night wore on, the gas continued to fill the room, a silent specter witnessing their nervous breakdowns and whispered confessions. The first night had begun, and with it their journey into an unknown world of sleeplessness. James could only guess what terrors or wonders this world held, the echoes of Dr. Williams' words still fresh in his mind. As he settled into the new rhythm of wakefulness, one thing was certain. There was no turning back. Chapter 11. The Night Unfolds. As the first night without sleep took hold, participants slowly began to scatter across the facility, like leaves on the wind. They sought refuge in the pockets of the complex that resonated with their personalities, their unspoken fears, and their hidden hopes. The gas-induced wakefulness amplified their senses, adding a bizarre intensity to the night's proceedings. In the sprawling library, a few of the participants clustered, their heads bent over the plethora of books as they sought solace in the world of literature. Their faces, lit by the soft glow of reading lamps, bore expression of concentration, almost as if trying to read the effects of the gas. Others found the comfort of the media room, where the buzz of movies and games filled the air. Laughter and hushed conversations mingled with the background score of a thriller movie, the room resonating with a strange mix of fear and joviality. A few wanderers chose the solitude of the art room, their silent silhouettes sketching away, painting their emotions onto canvas, or simply getting lost in the act of creation. Their quiet commitment a sharp contrast to the mechanical, eerie hiss that filled the space. James, our quiet observer, wandered for a while. His footsteps echoed through the steel-laden hallways, reverberating in the otherwise stifling silence. The intensity of the gas hadn't dampened his curiosity. Instead, it fueled his explorations. He finally found refuge in the garden area, a space adorned with a multitude of plants under the artificial sun. The trickling of the water from a small artificial waterfall created a soothing background rhythm. The verdant green, the damp earth, the sweet fragrances. The garden was a pocket of nature carefully preserved within the sterile confines of the facility. Here, under the simulated sunlight, James found a corner for himself. He leaned back against the wall, folding his legs to his chest as he immersed himself in the peaceful symphony of the garden. It was there that he chose to face the consequences of this unnatural wakefulness. The gentle rustling of leaves and the babbling of the waterfall, a stark contrast to the unease that threatened to consume him. The night stretched on, every participant in their corner wrapped in their thoughts and fears. As James gazed at the artificial sky, he was left to wonder how many more such nights awaited them, and what the price of this wakefulness would be. Chapter 12. Thoughts in the Garden. In the artificial glow of the garden, James found himself immersed in a pool of introspection. His eyes roamed over the simulated landscape, yet his mind was far from the lush greenery. The air carried a tinge of uneasiness, a residue of the sleep-inhibiting gas that pervaded every corner of the facility. This isn't natural, he thought as he pulled his knees tighter to his chest. The gas designed to keep them awake was a ghost that haunted the back of his mind. It was invisible, tasteless, yet its presence was palpable, a constant reminder of the sleep that would never come. Dr. Williams said it would just promote wakefulness, he murmured to himself. But this is more than just wakefulness. It's a constant state of alertness, a sense of heightened reality that borders on the surreal. His mind raced back to the room where they'd all sat, the clinical words of Dr. William echoing in his memory. His initial interest in the study, driven by the desperation for sleep, now seemed to be teetering on the edge of regret. He thought about his friends and family, their concerned faces when he'd announced his participation. "I didn't sign up for this," he whispered to the artificial wind. "I just wanted to sleep, to have a normal life." The irony was not lost on him, a man deprived of sleep now stuck in an endless loop of wakefulness. He grimaced as he realized his predicament. His struggle with insomnia seemed like child's play compared to this unknown territory. A wave of regret washed over him as he questioned his decision. Should I have taken the safer route of traditional treatment? The walls of the garden seemed to close in, reflecting his mental state. Trapped, helpless. However, there was no turning back now. He had signed up for this experiment, willingly walked into this state of perpetual wakefulness. All he could do now was brace himself for what was to come. He closed his eyes, inhaling the artificially fresh air, trying to calm his racing mind. His heart pounded against his chest like a war drum, its rhythm resonating with his apprehension. His final thoughts before he steeled himself for the long night ahead were of the sun, the real sun, and of sleep, precious and now elusive. The garden, with its artificial serenity, echoed with James' silent anxieties. The stakes had been raised, the path ahead shrouded in mystery, and James, like the others, was trapped in this sleepless purgatory, his future uncertain as the relentless cycle of wakefulness continued. Chapter 13. Echoes in the Corridor. In the monotony of perpetual wakefulness, James found solace in the shared stories of his fellow participants. He left the confinement of the artificial garden, venturing into the sterile corridors of the facility, the cold lighting casting long, impersonal shadows. He was a quiet man by nature, but the circumstances provoked him into action. His heart pounded against his rib cage. His pulse quickened, but he pressed on, determined to not feel so isolated in his fears. He first approached Abigail, a young woman with fiery red hair and a rebellious glint in her eye. She was huddled in a corner of the library, engrossed in a book. Her pale fingers were tracing the lines as her lips moved, whispering the words in a low hum. Abigail's eyes flicked towards him, scrutinizing, then softened. "You mean besides the money," she said, her voice carrying a touch of bitterness. "I haven't had a good night's sleep in years. I was hoping they'd fix me." As James moved through the facility, he interacted with the others, each conversation unveiling a unique tapestry of desperation, hope, and a strange acceptance of their circumstances. Some, like Joseph, a weary-looking man in his 40s, spoke openly about his battle with sleep paralysis, while others, like Marianne, a tight-lipped woman with steely eyes, offered only vague responses, leaving James to fill in the blanks. With each interaction, James felt a wave of empathy and shared vulnerability. His reflections mirrored the diverse stories he was encountering. "We're all victims of our circumstances seeking refuge in this clinical labyrinth," he mused. His conversation with Leon, a man of similar age, was particularly impactful. Leon was a war veteran, his insomnia a byproduct of post-traumatic stress disorder. His gruff exterior belied a man who had seen too much, his sleep haunted by the ghosts of his past. "I thought if they could keep me awake, maybe I wouldn't have to see those faces again," he confessed to James, his voice barely a whisper. These dialogues left a profound impact on James. He realized the gravity of his own struggle, yes, but he also felt less alone. He saw fragments of his fears, his hopes reflected in his fellow participants. Their common fight against the tyranny of sleeplessness created a strange bond, unspoken yet deeply felt. The facility, a cage of sleep deprivation, became a sanctuary of shared experiences. James, through his conversations, was no longer just a participant. He was a listener, a friend, and above all, a fellow insomniac searching for solace in the long, sleepless night. Chapter 14. Sleepless Portraits. Days blurred into nights and nights into days, yet in the relentless march of hours, James found stories. Stories that were whispered over shared meals, echoed in the corridor's silence, and revealed in hushed late-night conversations. It was in these fragments of time that the participants truly unveiled themselves. Amidst the monotonous hum of the facility, he learned of Sarah, a former night shift nurse. The ghostly pallor of her skin echoed her tales of the countless nights she had stayed awake, saving lives. "I became nocturnal," she confessed to James, her eyes glistening in the artificial light. "Now, I can't sleep when the world sleeps. I feel disconnected." Then there was Benjamin, a seasoned night owl and programmer whose relentless work habits had dislodged him from the natural sleep-wake cycle. "I could code for hours, days even. Sleep felt irrelevant. Now I can't reset. I'm stuck," he confessed, his eyes hollow, mirroring the empty coffee cups scattered around his workspace. The more James listened, the more he found himself drawn into this symphony of sleepless souls, each with a unique melody of despair. There was Martha, the artist who claimed her creativity sparked in the midnight hours, but had traded her dreams for endless nights of painting. Then Alan, the businessman whose anxiety wouldn't let him rest, his mind ceaselessly analyzing market trends and financial crises. The stories were as varied as the people themselves, but they were woven together by the common thread of insomnia. They painted a poignant picture of the vast spectrum of sleeplessness. The world, James realized, was full of people like him, people who lived in the shadow of a waking nightmare. James's perspective of his own insomnia evolved with every conversation. It was no longer just an ailment, an anomaly. It was a shared experience, a communal struggle. As he delved deeper into their stories, he saw fragments of his own life mirrored back at him. His insomnia was no longer a solitary battle. He was a part of a broader narrative, a shared tapestry of sleepless souls. The revelation didn't lessen his fear, but it gave him a strange sense of comfort. Chapter 15. fractures of uncertainty. The labyrinthine facility echoed not only with the hum of technology and sporadic whispers, but also with an undercurrent of anxiety. The air grew heavy with an ambiguous sense of foreboding. The unknown duration of the study, a hovering Damocles sword, had begun to gnaw at the edges of their composure. As days blurred into an undistinguishable haze of wakefulness, the participants' patience began to wear thin. Once carefree laughs that filled the communal dining area turned into forced chuckles. Small talk withered into uncomfortable silences. The quiet man with the friendly smile, Robert, had taken to biting his nails, his gaze often drifting towards the sealed windows. Martha, usually lost in her sketches, now often discarded them halfway, her pencil trembling in her hand. The persistent monotone of the facility turned into a relentless reminder of the passing time. The absence of clocks, once a mere peculiarity, now felt like a taunt. Each tick echoed within their minds, a harsh reminder of the sleep that eluded them and the growing unease that didn't. "I didn't sign up for this, man," Benjamin muttered one day, his eyes hollow, a stark contrast to his once vibrant gaze. His fingers restlessly tapped against his keyboard, a rhythmless symphony of frustration. "Not knowing when this ends. It's messing with my head." Confessions of regret started surfacing. Sarah, once proud of her nocturnal endurance, now looked lost, her eyes often welling up with tears. "I thought I could handle this. That this was my chance at a normal life. But this—" Her voice trailed off, her gaze fixed on the sterile white walls as if pleading for escape. The bubble of optimism that had surrounded them was beginning to burst, revealing cracks in their resilience. Doubts surfaced like ominous shadows, creeping into their conversations, their thoughts, their nightmares that visited during stolen moments of fitful sleep. It was a vicious cycle, a downward spiral. The more they yearned for sleep, the more it eluded them. The more they feared the passing time, the slower it seemed to crawl. The study that had promised them answers was now becoming a prison of uncertainty, each moment stretching into an agonizing eternity. The sleepless facility echoed with their unspoken fears, reverberating off its cold, sterile walls, a haunting symphony of escalating anxiety. Chapter 16. The Hearth of Solace. Nestled within the steel and stone structure of the sleep study facility lay a haven of comfort and familiarity. The kitchen and dining area, a stark contrast to the sterile minimalism of the rest of the facility. This space whispered of home and nostalgia, stirring memories of shared meals and laughter. A rustic wooden table held center stage, laden with bowls of fresh fruit and snacks that were perpetually replenished. It was surrounded by mismatched chairs, each with a personality of its own, from the rickety one with the squeaky leg to the plush one that gave a comfortable sink. Above it hung a pendant lamp, casting a gentle, warm glow, softening the harsh reality of their predicament, if only for a while. Lining one wall was a robust kitchen, a confluence of modern appliances and homely utensils. An array of colorful mugs sat next to the coffee maker, silent witnesses to countless weary faces, seeking solace in the bitterness of caffeine. The air here was rich with the aroma of brewing coffee, toasted bread, and the faint underlying scent of herbs. On the adjacent wall, tall bookshelves laden with books stood as a quiet testament to the mind's need for escape. Fiction, nonfiction, biographies, they catered to all, a refuge from the relentless sleeplessness. But it was more than just a room. The kitchen and dining area had evolved into the heartbeat of the facility. The long nights of wakefulness saw the participants gravitating towards its warmth, seeking both physical and emotional sustenance. The walls of this room, if they could speak, would tell tales of hushed conversations, fleeting smiles, and silent tears. Whether it was Sarah sketching by the corner table, Martha humming a soft melody while baking, or Benjamin arguing heatedly with Robert over the best strategy to play chess, the room became their sanctuary, a space where they could feel a semblance of normalcy amidst the chaos. It was here that they took tentative steps towards friendship, sharing their fears and hopes over cups of coffee and late-night snacks. It was here that they found strength in unity, an unspoken pact to endure together. Within the eerie setup of the facility, the kitchen and dining area became a lighthouse, a beacon of camaraderie and resilience, a silent reminder that even in the darkest of nights, there are moments of warmth and connection to be found. Chapter 17. Regulars of the Hearth. The kitchen and dining area of the facility, with its warmth and familiarity, attracted a particular group of participants, each of whom found solace in the space and in each other's company. These were the regulars, and their peculiar habits and characteristics were as varied as the patterns on the mismatched chairs. There was Lisa, a petite woman in her late 20s, an artist by profession. She could often be found tucked away in her preferred corner, her sketchbook on her lap, the soft scratch of her pencil against paper an ever-present background sound. The circles under her eyes spoke volumes of the sleep she craved, yet her hands moved with the precision of a well-rested mind. Sarah was in the study out of a desperate need for a cure to her insomnia, which was slowly chipping away at her creativity. Close to Lisa was usually Martha, a woman of 50 with a kind smile and a heart full of stories. Martha had been a singer. Sleepless nights had stolen her voice's vibrancy. In the kitchen, she found comfort, often baking late into the night. Her humming would fill the room, soft yet resonant, echoing her lost melodies. She participated in the study, hoping to reclaim her voice and her life. On the other side of the room, near the bookshelf, was Roger, a university professor in his early 60s. A stern man with sharp features, Roger spent most of his time engrossed in a book or arguing over chess strategies. His inability to sleep was damaging his memory, the cornerstone of his profession, and he was desperate to stop the decline. The chessboard became his battleground, a place to prove that he still held command over his intellect. Caught in the crossfire of Roger's intellectual battles was Leon, a burly man with a hearty laugh and a surprising knack for chess. A former soldier suffering from PTSD, Leon's sleep was haunted by nightmares. His participation in the study was a desperate attempt to find peace, and in the silence of the night he found it over the chessboard, outwitting Roger time and again. These individuals, each bearing the burden of their sleepless existence, found a strange sense of camaraderie in the shared warmth of the kitchen and dining area. Their interactions were a dance of unspoken understanding, respectful silence, and bursts of laughter, a dance choreographed by their collective hope for redemption from their insomnia. Chapter 18. The Unseen Ties. As seconds blurred into minutes and then into hours, the kitchen, dining area became a stage for the participants' personal stories, silent alliances, and brewing conflicts. Each conversation, each shared meal, each look and laugh became a thread, weaving the participants closer together in an intricate, almost invisible web. Lisa and Martha found common ground in their shared love for art. Martha's tales of singing in grand opera houses resonated with Lisa's aspirations for her artwork. Their discussions often echoed with shared dreams and the struggles that held them captive, their stories painting the air around them in hues of melancholy and hope. An alliance unspoken yet unmistakable formed between them, a solidarity of dreamers trapped in the labyrinth of insomnia. Leon and Roger, while constant chess adversaries, developed a peculiar camaraderie. Their intellectual duels at the chessboard evolved into profound conversations about life, war, and the meaning of success. Despite their different backgrounds, a soldier and a scholar, they found a common enemy in insomnia. Their alliance, though based on competition, held a depth that echoed mutual respect and understanding. Yet, as alliances formed, so did subtle divisions. James, an observer at heart, noted how certain participants gravitated towards each other, creating invisible boundaries. Not all conversations were for everyone, not all jokes were shared, and not all meals were communal. Despite the veneer of camaraderie, the study had unintentionally initiated a game of survival of the sleepless. The kitchen, dining area, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage set for a grand play, teeming with stories, alliances, hopes, and fears. It was here that the true nature of the sleep experiment unfurled, revealing a labyrinth of human emotions, ambitions, and the lengths they were willing to go to reclaim their stolen slumber. The study had begun, and the participants trapped in the maddening sleepless maze were unwittingly becoming pawns in a game they had yet to understand. Chapter 19. The Library, a Haven of Diversion. Nestled in the eastern wing of the facility was the library, a sanctuary for the minds starved for stimulation and distraction. Upon crossing its threshold, one was greeted with the rich, comforting scent of parchment and the faint rustling whispers of turning pages, echoing in the otherwise silent room. With its oak-lined walls, tall bookshelves, and cozy reading nooks, the library offered a sliver of familiar tranquility amidst the unnerving sterility of the facility. The library was a trove of stories, wisdom, and imagination, a mosaic of the participants' myriad interests. It held a vast collection of literature spanning genres and eras, from the high drama of Shakespeare tragedies to the crisp prose of contemporary thrillers. There was poetry and philosophy, history and science, art and music, catering to the diverse tastes of the insomniacs, each of whom found their haven in its offerings. At the heart of the library, round tables housed an assortment of board games, puzzles, and brain teasers. Chessboards sat beside stacks of dominoes. Puzzle boxes kept company with decks of cards, each object a testament to the human mind's craving for challenge and entertainment in the face of monotonous. Even in sleep's absence, these games served as a stimulating substitute, creating an arena for intellectual showdowns, playful competition, and camaraderie. While the rest of the facility hummed with the unnatural vigor of the wakefulness gas, the library remained a place of respite. It was a labyrinth of stories and strategies, a playground for minds seeking a momentary escape from their relentless wakefulness. It was here, among the quiet rustle of pages and the soft clinking of game pieces, that the participants found the semblance of normality they yearned for, a reminder of the world outside the sealed windows. Here, they were more than just subjects in a sleep study. They were readers, thinkers, dreamers, identities they clung on to amidst the disorienting tide of endless wakefulness. Chapter 20. The Rules of Distraction. In the sanctuary of the library, amidst the sea of books and the inviting challenge of board games, a unique code of conduct emerged. Not a mandate from the facility's directors, but an unspoken agreement among the participants themselves. The unwritten rules of the library. Respect the quiet was the foremost among these, a collective agreement to preserve the library's tranquil atmosphere. Conversations, if any, were held in hushed tones, and heated debates over chess strategies or book critiques were handled with minimal disruption. Even the normally boisterous participants found themselves instinctively lowering their voices within these walls. This unspoken agreement was more than just about maintaining peace. It was an act of shared empathy, an understanding that they were all united in a common struggle. The battle against the relentless tide of wakefulness. Participants found solace in the written word and the strategic play of board games, using these tools to fend off the gnawing sensation of fatigue. The mysteries unraveling in a gripping detective novel, the cerebral thrill of a complex chess game, even the hypnotic rhythm of a beautifully written poem served as diversions, helping their minds to refocus, to momentarily forget the unnatural alertness forced upon them. They would immerse themselves in these distractions, often for hours on end. Conversations would revolve around intriguing book plots, tips for strategic game moves. Even impromptu book clubs and game tournaments would sprout, fostering a sense of community, a distraction from the grueling reality of their situation. The library, with its unwritten rules and mental diversions, became an essential part of their shared experience, a lifeline in their fight against the insidious foe of sleep deprivation. Chapter 21. Game of Minds. James had always had a penchant for chess, its complexity mirroring the intricate layers of human behavior, a puzzle to be unraveled. He was drawn to the chessboard in the library, the carved pieces standing proud and primed on the battlefield. It offered a silent challenge that was impossible to resist. As he positioned himself before the board, a participant named Elliot, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a weathered face, joined him. A silent agreement passed between them, and the game began. James played black, traditionally the defensive side, but he had always believed that true mastery lay in the art of defense. Every move he made was calculated, every piece considered integral. Just like in this experiment, he knew he wasn't in a position to attack. Instead, he had to be tactful, enduring, and patient. Elliot, on the other hand, was more aggressive, a reflection perhaps of his past as a firefighter, a role that demanded quick, decisive actions. His pieces charged forward, each move bold, each decision confident. Yet, despite his aggressive gameplay, there was a controlled method to his approach, a discipline born out of years of life-threatening encounters. As the game progressed, the board became a canvas of their personalities, each piece telling a tale, each move reflecting a part of their stories. Between moves, they spoke cautiously at first, then with increasing candor. Elliot shared tales of daring rescues and harrowing losses. His insomnia, he confessed, was a legacy of his years on duty, an unwelcome souvenir from countless nights of interrupted sleep and adrenaline rushes. James, in turn, shared his journey, his lifelong battle with sleeplessness, the isolation it brought, the desperation that led him to participate in this bizarre study. As he voiced his fears about the unknown effects of the gas, Elliot nodded, a silent acknowledgement of a shared apprehension. Their conversations flowed as freely as the game, their fears and anxieties finding a safe space on this battleground. The chessboard served as a metaphorical barrier, a place where they could unpack their worries without judgment. It was a game, but also a therapy session of sorts, a chance to explore their fears and strategies to tackle the sleepless hours ahead. As the night stretched on, the game intensified, mirroring the increasing stakes of their circumstances. Yet, amidst the battle of chess, an unexpected camaraderie was born. A bond bound by shared fears, shaped by shared experiences, solidified over a game of chess in Chapter 22, The Digital Oasis. The transition from the library to the TV area felt like a temporal shift, a journey from the tranquil past into the digital future. The TV area boasted sleek lines, a minimalist design, and a massive wall-mounted flat screen TV, the centerpiece of this modern temple of entertainment. The room was cloaked in soft, dim light, interrupted only by the occasional flicker of the giant screen and the subtle underglow of RGB lights. Black leather couches stretched across one side of the room, facing the behemoth of a TV, their surfaces reflecting the dancing lights from the screen. A cutting-edge sound system completed the high-tech setup, the numerous speakers hidden within the walls and ceiling, an invisible source of the crystal-clear audio that filled the room. The air here was different, charged with invisible currents of wireless connectivity, throbbing with the heartbeat of unseen data. While the kitchen dining area and library hummed with constant activity, the TV area was an island of solitude, an oasis for the one seeking refuge from the unending hum of conversation and clatter. It was less about social bonding and more about personal retreat, a haven where one could lose themselves in the endless stream of digital content. A select group of participants chose to isolate themselves here, their faces illuminated by the cold light of the screen. These were individuals who preferred the company of fictional characters over real ones, the predictability of scripted dialogues over the chaos of spontaneous conversations. The TV area, with its modern amenities and futuristic ambience, served a dual purpose. It was a distraction, a way to escape the reality of their situation, and a haven, a place to regain a semblance of normality amidst the surreal circumstances. It was a stark contrast to the quaint library, yet just as vital in the grand scheme of the experiment. Chapter 23, The Eyes in the Dark. There was a man who had never seen the sun, yet could perceive the universe in all its grandeur, its glorious chaos, and its intricate harmonies. He was Isaac, the blind man, a participant as enigmatic as he was insightful, a figure of remarkable calm and resilience. He was a permanent fixture in the TV area, his presence as constant as the low hum of the electronics. Isaac was a silhouette against the ambient light, the features of his face masked by shadows. Yet his blindness didn't dim his perception. It seemed to sharpen it. He would listen intently, his unseeing eyes darting towards the source of any sound, a reminder of his constant engagement with the world. The TV area was his chosen sanctuary, the place where his darkness met the electronic light. Accompanying him was a woman, Sophia, a motherly figure with a voice that could paint images as vivid as any visual medium. She had taken upon herself the responsibility to be Isaac's eyes, to narrate the TV shows to him, her voice dancing along with the plot twists and turns. Sophia would sit next to Isaac, describing the characters, their expressions, the environments, every nuance of the TV shows with a storyteller's finesse. Her voice was soothing, yet dynamic, capable of capturing a spectrum of emotions, from the joy of a sitcom's punchline to the suspense of a thriller's climax. The bond between Isaac and Sophia was a testament to the power of human connection. They were more than just two participants in a study. They were companions sharing a unique journey. Sophia's narratives transported Isaac into worlds beyond his tactile reach, while Isaac's thoughtful insights and candid reflections offered Sophia a fresh perspective on her understanding of the world. Their interaction was a dance of words and thoughts, a symbiotic relationship forged in the crucible of adversity. It was a bond that transcended their current circumstances, a beacon of empathy, resilience, and human connection amidst the uncertainty of the sleep-deprived study. Their companionship was a beacon of hope amidst the shadows of uncertainty. It was the silver lining in an otherwise ominous cloud, the pulse of life in a sterile environment. Their presence was a silent reminder of humanity's potential for compassion and mutual aid in the face of adversity. Chapter 24, Unseen Depths. With a sense of curiosity tinged with uncertainty, James found himself drawn to the man who couldn't see the world, but perhaps perceived it in ways he couldn't begin to comprehend. His feet guided him towards the faint electronic hum of the TV area, where Isaac was accompanied by his auditory guide, Sophia. As James neared them, he found himself feeling an inexplicable blend of apprehension and intrigue. Approaching a man who saw the world through sounds and touches was uncharted territory for him. He hesitated, then decided to sit next to Sophia, a respectful distance from Isaac, in case he startled him. It was a minor detail, but it spoke volumes of James's inherent empathy. With a soft, unobtrusive greeting, James announced his presence, feeling a slight thrill when Isaac nodded in acknowledgement, his face turning towards James in recognition. The blind man's unseeing gaze seemed to hold a universe of experiences that James could only dream of understanding. "What brings you here, James?" Isaac's voice was like the rolling tide, deep and resonating, punctuated by a serene calm. I'm not sure. Curiosity, I guess," James replied, unsure of how to articulate his fascination. Isaac chuckled. "Curiosity is a compass that leads us to our interests," he remarked. As the conversation ebbed and flowed, Isaac's life unfolded in front of James, a tapestry of resilience woven from the threads of adversity. Blinded in a car accident at a young age, Isaac had navigated life through sound, touch, and the vivid imagination that served as his inner sight. His decision to participate in the sleep study was an exploration of the boundaries of his abilities, a challenge to perceive a reality where sleep was withheld, an adventure into a world unseen even by those with sight. The unique challenges were evident. With the rest of the participants grappling with the physical consequences of sleep deprivation, Isaac faced an additional layer of complexity. His world of touch and sound was becoming disoriented, skewing his perception of time and space. Their conversation, brimming with shared insights and moments of quiet understanding, painted a picture of two men navigating uncharted waters. Their stories different, yet bound by a common thread: the quest to understand the human condition under extreme circumstances. It was an interaction that further unveiled the multifaceted nature of their reality, underlining the fact that even in darkness there was so much to see, to understand, and to learn. Chapter 25. Underneath the Quiet. Linda had been a constant yet often overlooked presence. Her reserved nature made her fade into the background. But today, something changed. As she started to speak, her usually hushed voice acquired an uncharacteristic assertiveness. James and a few others gathered around her, an air of anticipation hanging heavy over them. The usually warm, inviting kitchen suddenly took on a denser atmosphere, each tick of the clock echoing ominously as they waited for her story to unravel. "I never wanted to be here," she began. Her eyes, normally downcast and shrouded in silence, were now alive with a raw vulnerability that was deeply unsettling. Her hands trembled ever so slightly as she clutched her cup of tea, as though holding on to the last vestiges of her anonymity. "I wasn't given a choice," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. The words seemed to stick in her throat, hesitant, almost fearful. The kitchen held its breath as the painful truth bubbled to the surface. Linda, it seemed, had been pushed into this insomniac arena, not by her own volition, but by forces beyond her control. There was a collective gasp in the room. Questions raced through James's mind, but he stayed silent, offering Linda the space she needed to share. Who could have coerced her into such a dangerous experiment? What could possibly be the motive? With each word that tumbled from her lips, the tension in the room ratcheted up a notch. Linda painted a picture of herself as a pawn, maneuvered into the labyrinth of sleep deprivation by hands that worked behind a curtain of ambiguity. Her voice held a tremulous note of fear as she shared her concerns about the long-term effects of the sleep deprivation study. The room went deathly quiet, the only sound being the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant echo of footsteps in the corridor outside. James looked around at the shocked faces of the other participants, his own mind reeling from the revelation. The sleep deprivation experiment had suddenly taken on a much more sinister hue. What had once been an exploratory study into the limits of human endurance now held an undercurrent of coercion and manipulation. As James navigated through the shock, he could feel an icy dread spreading through his veins. The game, it seemed, had changed drastically. The price of participation was no longer just their sleep. It was their freedom, their choice, and possibly their lives. Chapter 26. Shattered Trust. As Linda's revelation reverberated through the room, a stunned silence morphed rapidly into a torrent of disbelief. A wave of shock swept through the kitchen, visible in the wide eyes and fallen jaws of the participants. The cozy haven, the social hub of the facility, had abruptly transformed into a tension-filled arena, each participant attempting to grapple with the enormity of Linda's declaration. "Are you serious, Linda?" The question shattered the silence. It was Martin, a wiry man who had barely spoken a word till now. His voice was raspy, and his eyes bore into Linda with a mixture of incredulity and suspicion. Chatter exploded among the participants. Their placid existence had been thrown into a tailspin. Each one tried to process the information, their minds whirring with questions. Skepticism etched on their faces. Why would someone force you into this? Sarah, a motherly figure with a perpetually soothing demeanor, asked, her brows furrowed in confusion. Linda, now at the center of all attention, looked like a deer caught in headlights. She had just unveiled her darkest secret, and the aftermath was a storm she had not anticipated. Fear quickly sparked suspicion, and the room heated up with accusations and counter-accusations. Each participant eyed the other warily, probing for hidden agendas. A bond that was being delicately woven was now fraying at the edges, the camaraderie replaced with a simmering mistrust. The sleep deprivation experiment was no longer a shared journey, but a battlefield of doubts and suspicions. As the tension peaked, James took a deep breath, attempting to swallow his own rising anxiety. He felt an acute sense of empathy for Linda. The suffocating pressure of their eyes on her was enough to break even the strongest of spirits. However, he knew he needed to act. To reinstate some semblance of peace, he raised his voice, commanding the attention of the room. "Enough," he paused, ensuring he had their undivided attention. "We're all in this together, aren't we?" James looked at each participant, his gaze steady and reassuring. "Let's not let fear turn us against each other." In that moment, James transformed from just another participant into a beacon of hope. His intervention revealed the shared vulnerability in the room, serving as a stark reminder of the real enemy, the relentless experiment that gnawed at their sanity with every passing second. His words reverberated through the room, casting a mirror to their shared plight. However, the tension had already left a crack in their unity, a crack that would take more than comforting words to repair. A sense of dread lingered, an undercurrent of suspicion that continued to gnaw at the group's once harmonious existence. The question was, how long before it erupted once again? Chapter 27. Through the Eyes of a Tortured Artist. As the second day of storytelling dawned, the group, still in the throes of unease from Linda's revelation, gathered with trepidation. The participant chosen to share their story was Lisa, a young artist with a vibrant personality and a proclivity for flamboyance. An electric buzz radiated from her, a stark contrast to the dark circles under her eyes, a testament to his relentless battle with insomnia. Lisa stood, her aura commanding attention, a raw intensity lingering in her caul-rimmed eyes. She cleared her throat, offering a smile that did little to mask the torment simmering beneath it. "Well, where do I begin?" Her story unfurled like a canvas painted with paradoxes. She spoke of nights spent in futile pursuit of sleep, the tick-tock of the clock echoing in the desolate silence of her apartment. She described how the sun would peek in through the blinds, painting a fresh layer of fatigue on her drawn face. Her vibrant personality belied the true depth of her suffering, making her struggle even more poignant. Lisa painted a vivid picture of her creative process being impeded by her insomnia. Her brush had once danced across the canvas, effortlessly bringing life to her imagination. Sleep deprivation, however, had introduced an unexpected adversary. The vivid landscapes, once fertile with creativity, had become barren and desolate. Her once vibrant color palette was now replaced by shades of despair. "I watched as insomnia slowly drained the color from my life," Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her confession held the room captive, a heartbreaking tale of an artist wrestling with her own mind. As Lisa's narrative progressed, an element of mystery seeped in. She revealed how, in her darkest hour, she had received an anonymous email introducing the sleep study. It was as though someone had known of her desperate struggle, reaching out just when she needed most. It was this enigmatic element that had compelled her to enroll in the program. "Who knew I was struggling so much?" Lisa mused aloud. "Who pointed me toward this place?" The questions hung in the air, thickening the cloud of mystery that shrouded the facility. The specter of external influence raised its head once more, casting long, foreboding shadows over the gathering. Lisa's tale, while engrossing, added another layer to the ongoing tension in the room. Yet again, the cruel face of insomnia was brought to the forefront, starkly reminding the participants of their shared struggle. The introduction of a possible external influence in Lisa's enrollment only heightened the atmosphere of suspicion. As Lisa returned to her seat, a heavy silence fell over the room. The participants lost in their thoughts, brooding over the inscrutable circumstances that had drawn them together. Chapter 28. A Day of Revelation and Reflection. The storytelling session that day seemed to take on a life of its own. One by one, each participant revealed their intricate tapestry of sleepless nights, painted with varying shades of despair and endurance. The space, usually permeated with an undercurrent of anxiety, transformed into a sanctuary, as though the act of unburdening was a salve for their collective wounds. Tales unfolded, each more poignant than the last. Their narratives were so intricately woven with their individual struggles that it was impossible not to empathize, not to relate on some level. Conversations sprung forth, deep, visceral, and raw, revealing more of their humanity with every shared word. The once aloof businessman Lawrence spoke of the long nights when sleep evaded him, replaced by a relentless tide of thoughts about failed deals and missed opportunities. Rebecca, a ballet dancer, danced a poignant dance of words, her eloquent narrative sketching the brutal picture of a dancer fighting fatigue, her dreams slipping away with each sleepless night. The act of sharing their struggles wove a transient bond of camaraderie among the group, a sense of solidarity in their shared ordeal. It was a surreal respite from the overarching aura of apprehension that clung to the facility like an unwelcome specter. Through it all, James was a silent observer, soaking in every tale. The stories stirred something within him, bringing to surface his own battle with insomnia. Each narrative was like a mirror, reflecting facets of his struggle he'd long buried in the recesses of his mind. James found himself lost in a labyrinth of thought. The eerie parallels between their experiences and his own gave him pause. He found solace in their shared experiences, yet he couldn't shake off the unsettling realization of the profound impact insomnia had on their lives. It was a somber moment of introspection, a stark reminder of the complex and delicate intricacies of the human mind. As the day drew to a close, the group, emotionally spent yet oddly rejuvenated, dispersed into their individual corners. The storytelling session had evolved into an unexpected therapeutic experience, a touchstone of shared understanding that momentarily drew them out of their insomniac haze. But as the sun set and night encroached, the reality of their circumstances set in, bringing with it a renewed wave of uncertainty. The safety of daylight was behind them, and the sleepless night loomed ahead, a chilling reminder of the fight they were all embroiled in. Chapter 29. The Unveiling of Shadows. Day 3 dawned grim and daunting within the stark walls of the sleep study facility. An unspoken unease hung heavy in the air, each participant bearing the weight of their sleepless existence with a resolute stoicism. The allure of their shared stories had begun to wane, replaced by a grim expectancy of the bleak tales yet to unfold. Leon, a former soldier with a weathered countenance and eyes that spoke of unspeakable horrors, took the stage. The silence was thick as he began to recount his tale. His words seemed to take form, painting a haunting picture of the battlefield, a symphony of gunfire and explosions, the air heavy with the stench of blood and fear. His sleep disorder, he explained, was a relentless nemesis born out of the cauldron of warfare. Insomnia was but a battlefield in his mind, a ceaseless replay of every mission, every casualty, every brush with death he had survived. As Leon wove his narrative, a shroud of melancholy descended upon the group. The room, once buzzing with camaraderie, seemed to shrink, suffused with a palpable dread that wound its way around every heart, every soul. Leon's tale served as an eerie beacon, illuminating the path to darker, more personal revelations. The ensuing hours saw a cascade of soul-stirring confessions. The once vibrant Elliot shared the depths of his depression, brought on by his unending struggle with sleeplessness. Martha, who had borne her ordeal with silent resolve, revealed a heartrending past of personal loss, her grief keeping sleep at bay. Every word, every confession, stirred the once still waters of their collective consciousness. The storytelling sessions were no longer a respite, but a tumultuous journey into the depths of their fears and vulnerabilities. The shared experience was no longer therapeutic, but increasingly daunting, every revelation chipping away at their resolve. The shadows of their sleep deprivation began to loom larger, casting longer, darker shadows. The strain was evident in their weary eyes, the tense set of their shoulders, the falter in their voices. The study was not just a battle against insomnia anymore. It was a battle against their inner demons, brought to life in their stark narratives. And as day 3 in the sleep study facility drew to a close, the reality of their struggle was clearer than ever. It was a war waged not only on the battlefield of sleeplessness, but also within the trenches of their scarred souls. Chapter 30. The Tumultuous Tide. A shroud of shocked silence blanketed the room as the last of Leon's narrative hung heavy in the air. The horrifying images his words painted refused to fade away, seared into each participant's mind. A chilling reminder of the depths of despair that insomnia had the potential to dredge up. The initial shock that had stiffened their bodies gradually started to thaw. The silence was broken by a collective, almost inaudible sigh as the harsh reality of their shared struggles sunk in. The dynamic within the group began to shift, their personal barriers slowly crumbling, replaced by a newfound sense of empathy. As the hours stretched on, the floodgates of shared experience had been thrown open. The participants found themselves dragged under by the tumultuous undercurrent of shared despair and turmoil. The stories of sleeplessness, once seeming so distinct, began to bleed into one another, painting a picture so grim that it took their breath away. With this revelation, a sense of dread began to infect the room, a creeping, insidious fear that wound its way around their hearts. It was not merely the fear of their shared insomnia and the personal horrors it had wrought. It was the realization of the study's implications, the probing into their most vulnerable selves under the guise of scientific research. Hushed whispers began to flutter around the room like wary birds. Doubt, once a small seed, began to sprout and take root in their minds. They eyed each other with newfound wariness, the seeds of mistrust sown amidst their burgeoning fears. The study, they realized, was not just about the science of sleep, but the dissection of their deepest fears and most haunting experiences. As day 3 in the sleep study facility drew to a close, a tangible unease had settled within the facility's stark walls. The dynamics within the group had been irrevocably altered, a result of their shared despair. The dread of what lay ahead, the unnerving reality of their struggles, and the wavering trust in their fellow participants marked the beginning of an ominous chapter in their shared journey. Chapter 31. Web of Uncanny Connections. The following day, the storytelling continued unabated. The participants were caught in a melancholic rhythm of baring their souls and listening to the others. As the day wore on, an odd pattern began to surface. Mark, a quiet man in his early 50s, took his turn at the narrative and drew the group into the web of his past. His soothing voice was a stark contrast to the turbulent content of his narrative. "Back when I was first dealing with the legal issues of my insomnia," Benjamin began, his fingers nervously twitching, "I sought out professional help from a law firm, Prepaid Legal." A gasp echoed around the room as several participants registered the name. Linda, James, Sarah, and Roger looked at each other, their eyes wide with recognition. The same firm had been involved in their own legal issues related to sleep disorders. The coincidence seemed too uncanny to be true. "And that's not all," Mark continued, unaware of the growing tension in the room. "The leading sleep disorder specialist I consulted, and who recommended this study, was none other than Dr. William." The room fell deathly silent, the echo of Dr. William's name lingering ominously in the air. The participants stared at each other, an unsettling realization dawning upon them. They were not just random individuals brought together for a study. They were interlinked by a strange web of connections, the threads of which were still unclear. The revelation seemed to chill the air, casting long shadows of doubt and suspicion. The stories weren't just mere personal experiences anymore. They were pieces of a complex puzzle, clues that pointed to a deeper, darker mystery. As the participants left the storytelling session that day, they carried with them an uneasy silence. Their minds were a whirlpool of thoughts, spinning around the inexplicable connections between them. The walls of the facility seemed to close in, the mystery of the sleep study deepening, casting a menacing cloud over their collective psyche. Chapter 33. Unraveling the Threads. The final participant, Sarah, a soft-spoken woman with a complexity of history etched in her eyes, prepared to share her story. There was a sense of dread among the group. The once comforting practice of sharing stories had now morphed into an unexpected conduit for revelations and suspicions. As Sarah's voice broke the unsettling silence, a grim prelude seeped into their hearts. Her tale began innocuously enough, revolving around a simple childhood in a Midwestern town. Her family was ordinary, her upbringing quintessential American, but her sleep was haunted by nightmares that were anything but common. The group leaned forward, each member ensnared by the narrative's impending gravity. The crescendo of her story, the revelation of Dr. Williams' involvement, came as a visceral shock. She revealed the doctor as her childhood psychiatrist, the one who initially diagnosed her with chronic nightmares and later insomnia. He was her beacon in the stormy seas of her tormented sleep, offering guidance, hope, and a pharmaceutical lifeline. But as her dependence on Dr. Williams' prescribed medication increased, so did her sleeplessness, spiraling into an inescapable vortex of insomnia. The room echoed with a heavy silence, each participant grappling with the significance of Sarah's story. A twisted mosaic was beginning to form, one where Dr. Williams was no longer a peripheral figure, but a common denominator in their lives. Each narrative, each life altered by sleep deprivation, bore his indelible mark. He was no longer just a psychiatrist, a name mentioned in passing. He was the puppet master, his invisible strings tied to their fates. As Sarah's voice faded, the implications of her narrative hung in the air, adding an icy layer to the thickening tension. The final piece of the puzzle had been added, yet the picture it painted was terrifying. The room hummed with anticipation, a silent plea for answers, for closure, hanging heavy as they grappled with the nightmare that their lives had become. What had begun as a simple sleep study had twisted into a mystery, their lives serving as the chapters of a tale they were desperate to understand. Chapter 34. Unseen Shadows. In the lingering aftermath of Sarah's revelation, the group found itself sinking into a dreadful epiphany. A shared truth was emerging, unfurling its terrifying silhouette from the shared shadows of their stories. They all shared a dark commonality. Dr. William, a man they knew as their savior, their last resort in their sleep-deprived hell, had been secretly spinning a web of manipulation around their lives. James spoke first, his voice a hollow echo resonating within the oppressive silence. "We're not here by coincidence, are we?" His words hung in the air, a grim hypothesis taking shape. Linda, a stark contrast to her usual quiet self, fired back. "Are we just his lab rats then?" She scanned the room, eyes wide and anxious, seeking validation. A ripple of acknowledgement passed through the group, their minds racing to process the horrifying prospect. Lisa, the artist, began pacing, her face paling as she replayed her own narrative, now painted with the indelible mark of Dr. Williams' manipulation. Her bouts of insomnia, the serendipitous opportunity to join this study. They all bore the watermark of a well-crafted plan. The sickening realization hit her like a punch to the gut. The room felt colder, a chilling undercurrent of fear creeping into every corner. The sleep study they had seen as a salvation was now shrouded in mistrust, the veneer of its purpose shredded by their newfound insight. The once friendly shared space now felt like a cage, its invisible bars tightening around them. The revelation felt like a plot from a dystopian novel, a chilling tale of manipulation and deceit. Yet this was their reality, their lives serving as the chapters in a narrative they no longer controlled. Their participation in this experiment had taken on a sinister meaning, each day passing not in the pursuit of a cure, but as a pawn in a much larger game. "We need to find out more. There's more to this than we see," James suggested, the weight of leadership heavy on his shoulders. His statement was met with nods of agreement, fear-hardened resolve glinting in each participant's eyes. The study had united them not in sleeplessness, but in a fight against unseen shadows. Their journey in the sleep study had taken a horrifying turn, but they were not about to back down. Chapter 35. Tangled Web. A pall of silence fell over the room, each participant lost in the tumult of their thoughts. Their stories no longer singular threads, but interwoven parts of a larger, sinister tapestry. The connection between their lives, once obscured, was now blatantly glaring, the shared history hanging heavily in the room. Lisa, her artist's mind buzzing with connectivity, was the first to voice it out. "We're all interconnected, aren't we?" She questioned, although rhetorical, demanded affirmation. There was a tremor in her voice, her usually flamboyant personality subdued under the weight of the revelation. Her insomnia, her enrollment in the study, now reflected hauntingly in the narratives of her fellow participants. Leon, his soldier's instincts heightened, mapped out the shared narrative on an imaginary battlefield. Dr. William at its center, and each of their lives the territories he had quietly invaded. The names, the incidents, the mentions of prepaid legal law firm. They were not just coincidences, but intricate knots in the grand scheme of things. Linda, her quiet demeanor now replaced by a steely resolve, acknowledged, "We've been hand-picked, all of us. Not by choice, but by design. Her declaration echoed around the room, the horrifying truth settling in. The idea of manipulation gripped them, the threads of their lives manipulated and strung together by Dr. William. James, feeling the waves of shock and confusion emanating from the group, tried to retain a semblance of control. He swallowed hard, his throat dry from the heavy truth. We need to get to the bottom of this. We can't let fear control us. The tension was palpable, a tightrope strung across the room, each of them precariously balancing on it. The overlaps in their narratives were no longer mere curiosities, but grim reminders of a bigger plan at play. The web of connections was unraveling, and as they stepped back to look at the picture, a sense of unease settled. Their lives were no longer just their own, but entangled in a tale none of them had signed up for. This realization marked a new chapter in their collective journey. As they navigated through the fog of uncertainty, they found themselves tied together, not just by their insomnia, but by the shared thread of manipulation. The sleep study was no longer about a cure. It was now a labyrinth of dark secrets waiting to be unraveled. Chapter 36. Emergent Rifts. A venomous silence replaced the amicability of their shared narratives, as if their interconnecting histories had shattered the fragile peace that the storytelling sessions had woven. In the frigid air of the common room, unspoken accusations hung heavy. Leon was the first to crack. "How do we know," he spat, "that one of us isn't in league with this Dr. William? That one of us isn't here to observe, to report?" His voice ricocheted off the stark white walls, shattering the silence. Linda recoiled at his words, her eyes darting to each participant in turn. Her retort was swift and sharp. "What about you, Leon? How do we know you're not the spy?" Accusations bounced back and forth like a gruesome game of ping-pong. The room vibrated with distrust, and the cohesive group of insomniacs fractured under its strain. Within the ensuing chaos, alliances began to form. Leon, ever the empathetic soul, gravitated towards Linda, his expressive eyes echoing her fear. On the other hand, Sarah, her soldier's instincts blazing, found an ally in Mark. Their shared suspicion formed a volatile alliance, a counterweight to Max and Linda's defensive coalition. In the middle of the growing storm, James attempted to navigate the turbulent waters. His voice, once the calming force in their gatherings, struggled to rise above the chaos. "We need to stick together," he implored. "We need each other to get through this." Yet his words fell on deaf ears. The tension in the room escalated like a ticking time bomb, their shared fear of manipulation transforming into a weapon of division. The unity fostered through shared stories and empathy was swept away, replaced by suspicion and alliances carved out of fear. The third day of the sleep study marked a grim turning point. Their narratives had woven a complex web, and now their shared histories had become their greatest adversaries. The sleep-deprived group had become a pit of animosities and alliances, their trust in each other worn thin. What had started as an experiment in sleep had morphed into a perilous game of survival. Chapter 37. The Puppeteer Unveiled. The insidious truth slithered into the common room, coiling itself around the group with an icy grip that tightened with each passing second. Dr. William, a name that now bore a chilling significance, was the puppeteer pulling their strings all along. As the reality sunk in, the room became a theater of raw emotions. The air crackled with an electric mix of fury, disbelief, and dread. Each participant had been personally selected, carefully placed into this insidious experiment by the very man they'd entrusted with their sleep struggles. Lisa was the first to shatter the silence. "Why us?" Her voice trembled, the vibrant artist for once, drained of color. "What does he gain from watching us unravel?" The question echoed throughout the room, each participant grappling with the horrifying revelation. Linda, once the quiet observer, let out a raw sob, her slender form shaking with the force of her emotions. Leon, ever the soldier, clenched his fists, his knuckles white as he grappled with his simmering rage. Mark, his face a mask of disbelief, stared blankly at the floor. The alliances forged in suspicion and fear seemed to dissolve in the wake of the revelation. In their place, a fragile solidarity formed, a shared victimhood at the hands of Dr. William. Yet, even as they were united in their outrage, a palpable fear hung in the air, the fear of what awaited them in this devious experiment. James, despite his own roiling emotions, tried to piece together the fractured mosaic of their predicament. "We need to understand why," he asserted, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "Why did he bring us here? What is his endgame?" But the answers remained elusive. lost in the labyrinth of Dr. Williams' manipulation. The puppeteer had been unmasked, his ominous shadow looming larger than ever over the participants. Yet the puppet show was far from over, and as the strings of mistrust and fear tightened, the sleep study plunged into an even deeper abyss of uncertainty. Chapter 38. Echoes from the Past. The room filled with the pulsating rhythm of their shared betrayal. One by one, they traced the threads of their pasts, retracing their steps, their encounters with the puppet master, Dr. William. Their individual accounts began to paint a disturbing portrait of a master manipulator. Lisa began, her voice a mere whisper, recounting his encounter with Dr. William at an art exhibition. The doctor had admired her work, sympathized with her insomnia, fueled artistry, and suggested the sleep study as a means of inspiring new avenues for her creativity. The echoes of his well-crafted deception left a bitter taste in Max's mouth. As the others listened, a pattern began to emerge. Linda, her voice wavering, remembered Dr. William as a supportive listener during a charity event, promising a cure for her sleep disorder, all under the pretext of helping her reclaim her life. Leon's story held a more direct connection. He had met Dr. William during his PTSD therapy sessions. He had assured him the sleep study was a step towards healing, a chance to overcome the haunting nightmares of the battlefield. And Mark, his involvement was an indirect one. He had been introduced to the doctor by his attorney from the prepaid legal law firm who had praised Dr. William's groundbreaking research on insomnia. Little did he know then that he was being set up for a sinister agenda. The shared narratives not only solidified the group's horrifying realization of being ensnared by Dr. William, but also amplified their collective anger. The room reverberated with a newfound energy, a simmering rebellion against their puppeteer. The bastard manipulated us, played on our weaknesses, Mark spat out, the vibrant colors of his personality now replaced with shades of raw anger. We can't let him get away with this. Echoes of agreement ricocheted around the room. As their individual threads of betrayal intertwined, they formed a strong bond of rebellion. The puppeteer may have been pulling their strings until now, but as the night deepened, so did their resolve to take control of their own destinies, whatever the cost. Chapter 39. Strings of Deception. As the aftertaste of anger lingered in the room, an unusual silence draped over the participants. Their expressions were etched with a mixture of confusion and curiosity, each entangled in their own thoughts. The room buzzed with an undercurrent of uncertainty, a stark contrast to the eruption of emotions just moments before. It was Mark who broke the silence, his voice cutting through the tension like a cold gust of wind. Did anyone else here use prepaid legal? The room stirred. Eyes flickered from one face to another, gauging reactions. What does that have to do with anything? Lisa questioned, her brows furrowing. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. That's how I got introduced to William. My lawyer suggested I join his study. I didn't think anything of it at the time. One by one, confessions started pouring in. Linda, James, Max, all had ties to the prepaid legal firm. The realization spread like a chilling wind across the room. A web had been spun around them, their lives intertwined in a way they could have never imagined. Even the blind man had been guided by the law firm. But why? Linda's voice was barely above a whisper. Her eyes, usually so full of life, mirrored the dread that had come to rest in each of their hearts. What does a law firm have to gain from this? Their questioning gaze settled on James. He was the most familiar with legal intricacies, given his background as an investigative journalist. He looked back at them, his eyes reflecting their shared fear. I don't know, he admitted, but we need to find out. Their sleep-deprived minds raced to connect the dots, forming scenarios that veered between outlandish conspiracies and chilling possibilities. The discovery of their shared legal representation was not merely another coincidental link in their stories. It was a breadcrumb that could lead them to untangle the threads of the deception that had ensnared them. With each revelation, their reality warped further, stretching their trust in each other thin and hardening their resolve to expose the puppeteer pulling their strings. And amidst the chaos, the room vibrated with a grim understanding. The puppet show was far from over. Chapter 40. Shattered Illusions. Silence sat heavy in the room, much like an unwelcome guest. The air was thick with a cocktail of bewilderment, dread, and a sense of violation that clung to each participant. With every revelation, the threads of their seemingly separate lives intertwined, knotting into a disturbing tapestry of deception and manipulation. Maybe this isn't a sleep study, Lisa suggested, her voice barely cutting through the charged silence. Her statement, no matter how outrageous it seemed, couldn't be dismissed outright, not when their reality was contorting into an unrecognizable form. This notion, though initially met with incredulous glances, gave way to an uneasy understanding. Could they be mere pawns in a grander scheme? But then, what is it? Some sort of social experiment? A mind control study? Leon queried, his voice escalating as he thought aloud. The room erupted into a frenzy of theories, each more paranoid than the last. The study was a facade for a government brainwashing initiative, or perhaps a psychological experiment examining stress-induced responses. Maybe they were being tested for some sort of super soldier program, their insomnia serving as the perfect affliction to mold them into relentless warriors. Leon, usually brimming with energy, slumped in his chair, his vibrant demeanor shadowed by the weight of their circumstances. What if we're trapped here like lab rats in a maze? Are we just supposed to keep running until they're satisfied? He looked around the room, his eyes pleading for reassurance. His sentiment echoed around the room, an unsettling chord that resonated with each of them. The sanctuary they had voluntarily walked into now seemed more like a prison, and they, the prisoners, the shared fear amplified their desire to escape this labyrinth, their minds already scheming possible ways out. Fear, once a soft whisper in the background of their lives, now shouted at them from every corner. The familiarity they had found in each other's stories now felt like a cruel mockery. The bonds that had begun to form were strained under the weight of this deception, a fragile construct teetering on the edge of collapse. Their collective strength was their only hope now, but with trust rapidly evaporating, their future in the sleep study grew darker and more unpredictable. Chapter 41. The Edge of Madness. A dreadful descent into madness commenced within the sterile white walls of the sleep study facility. The inner clock no longer ticked away hours, but fragments of sanity. The pristine environment seemed to mock the turbulence brewing within its subjects. The once vibrant and lively participants were now ghosts of their former selves, a grotesque mirage of their initial enthusiasm. Their bodies bore the stark testimony of relentless sleeplessness. The once healthy and robust participants were now mere shadows, their clothes hanging loose on their skeletal frames. Dark circles under their bloodshot eyes marked a disturbing contrast against their pale, almost lifeless skin. Their movements were sluggish. Every action seemed like a monumental task, a testimony to their lethargy. Each one seemed like a living statue, a grotesque testament to the cruel artistry of prolonged wakefulness. But the outward signs of deterioration were just the beginning. Inside their minds, a far more insidious transformation was at play. An unsettling discordance began to brew, slowly chipping away at their mental fortitude. Their minds, once full of logical thoughts and coherent conversations, were becoming a maelstrom of irrationality and fear. "Did you hear that?" Linda whispered one day, her eyes darting around the room as if she could spot the source of a sound only she could hear. The group would glance at her, their tired eyes reflecting a mix of concern and fear. But no one dared to ask the obvious question. Lisa, once the vibrant artist, started to paint again, but her once colorful palette was replaced by blacks and grays. Her once lively and surreal creations had turned into grotesque portrayals of horror and despair, each stroke revealing the chaotic symphony playing in her mind. Conversations were no longer a communal exchange of words, but more like disjointed monologues, a testament to their unraveling sanity. "The walls are closing in," James murmured to no one in particular, his eyes fixed on a corner of the room where the paint had begun to peel. Their words became less a tool of communication and more a projection of their warped reality. The concrete boundaries of their reality began to blur, morphing into a distorted reality painted by their weary minds. The eerie silence of the facility seemed to echo with whispers for Sarah, whispers that screamed tales of a bloody past. The sterile white walls seemed to close in on James, each day a little more, threatening to suffocate him. The world around them was no longer a shared reality, but a personalized nightmare tailored by the cruel hand of insomnia. Each passing day in the sleep study was a step further into the abyss of insanity, the string tethering them to their sanity growing thin. The study no longer tested their ability to stay awake, but their ability to hold on to the last remnants of their sanity. The question was not if they would succumb, but when. Chapter 42. The Undoing of Order. The disintegration of order began with the birth of phantasmagoric apparitions, sprung forth from the cauldron of their sleep-starved minds. Unseen to the others, they were as real to the sufferer as the sterile white walls that kept them confined. Leon, the tough former soldier, started to see blood on his hands that refused to wash off. It was a horrific reminder of a past he wished to forget. Each droplet appeared so real that he could almost feel the stickiness, the warm coppery smell filling his nostrils. Yet no matter how many times he scrubbed his hands raw, the blood persisted, a bloody specter refusing to be banished. James started to see shadowy figures looming in the corners of his vision, darting out of sight when he tried to focus on them. These elusive entities whispered words he couldn't understand, their hisses growing louder with each passing day. He would often whirl around, eyes wide with fear, swearing that the shadowy figure had brushed against him, leaving a chilling touch in its wake. These hallucinations, vivid and horrifying, threw them into an emotional maelstrom. Each participant was shackled to their own surreal world of nightmare, their torment only visible to themselves. They grappled with their decaying grip on reality, their minds caught in a grisly tug of war between the waking world and the horrifying hallucinations birthed from their sleep-deprived brains. Their faces bore a shared expression of terror, their eyes mirroring a silent scream. Their reality was shifting, twisting into a terrifying caricature of their worst fears and experiences. The burden of their hallucinations was a solitary one, deepening the fissures between them. A growing sense of isolation pervaded the group. Some participants, like Max, began to recede into the recesses of their own mind. The young artist, once eager to share his thoughts and emotions, now spent his hours huddled in a corner, lost in the haunting lullaby of his hallucinations. He no longer participated in group activities, his social interactions dwindling to curt nods and vacant stares. The group was fragmenting, each participant isolating themselves in an attempt to battle their individual nightmares. The laughter and camaraderie that once filled the sterile white rooms were replaced by an oppressive silence, punctuated only by whispered conversations and fearful glances. This was the collapse of order, the fall of the last bastion of their shared reality. The sleep study was no longer a shared experience, but a solitary expedition into the abyss of insanity. Chapter 43. The Shattering Silence. The sterile, stark room had long been enveloped in a disquieting silence, a thick blanket of stillness that masked the chaos within the participants' minds. This silence, however, was broken abruptly by a guttural roar that filled the room with a tangible dread. Isaac, the blind man, known for his tranquil demeanor and a stoicism that seemed impervious to the hellish reality of their situation, suddenly erupted. His screams echoed off the room's cold walls, the guttural tones of his voice a stark contrast to his usually calm manner. The serene facade that he had maintained so far shattered, revealing a well of pent-up frustration and fear. Each participant froze at the blind man's violent outburst. Their startled eyes locked onto his thrashing figure as he writhed on the ground, fists clenched, his face a contorted mask of pain. His hitherto calm voice was now a mere echo in their memories, replaced by the throaty, raw screams that seemed to pull them into an abyss of despair. His scream was not merely a roar of pain, but a siren call that heralded the impending collapse of their sanity. It served as a grim reminder of the toll their continuous wakefulness was taking on their mental and emotional well-being. His outburst cracked the silence like a whip, adding a new layer of fear to their shared reality. As his screams subsided into pained gasps, the blind man began to mutter cryptic words, his voice low and hoarse. "The shadow. It's always there. Lurking," he rasped, his voice growing weaker with each word. His cryptic words hung heavily in the room, the sense of impending doom growing palpable. The others exchanged bewildered glances, the meaning behind his words as elusive as their own sanity. The unspoken questions lingered in the air. What shadow? What was he seeing? His cryptic utterances only served to add to the tension. Their understanding of their shared reality was fractured, the shards reflecting the fear and confusion that had seeped into their psyche. The blind man's violent outburst marked a horrifying shift in their collective journey. The echoes of his screams a grim reminder of the path that lay ahead. Chapter 44. The Descent into Chaos. The initial paralysis that had gripped the room following the blind man's deafening roar gave way to a flurry of movement. Each participant, propelled by an instinctual need to respond, scrambled to the blind man's side. Their shadows, grotesquely elongated and dancing wildly on the stark white walls, reflected the chaos that was descending upon them. James, despite the pounding in his temples and the gnawing fear in his gut, lunged towards the blind man, reaching out to hold him still. His fingers dug into the man's heaving sides as he tried to calm him down. But the blind man's body thrashed uncontrollably, his strength amplified by his distress. "No, no, no more shadows! No more!" the blind man shrieked, the raw terror in his voice painting a chilling picture that would forever be etched into their minds. His pleas bounced off the walls, echoing the group's collective fear. It was a mirror reflecting their own suppressed horrors, their nightmares given voice. Sarah, her eyes wide and face drained of color, tried to soothe him with hushed words, her hands gently stroking his forehead. Yet her efforts seemed futile against the blind man's relentless struggle. His screams continued to punctuate the air, each one a resounding note of despair, a symphony of their shared terror. In the aftermath of his outburst, an oppressive silence reclaimed the room. It was the kind of silence that came after a storm, heavy and resonating with the echoes of destruction. The blind man lay still, his ragged breaths punctuating the stillness, his body trembling like a leaf in a violent storm. The event left an indelible mark on the group dynamics. The shared fear had evolved into a tangible dread, each participant now acutely aware of the ticking time bomb that was their sanity. A heavy gloom hung over them, their eyes reflecting a desperate understanding of their situation. A primal sense of dread slowly started to infuse the room, a malevolent beast that fed on their fear and uncertainty. As each participant retreated into their private corners, their minds grappling with the horrifying spectacle they had just witnessed, the room descended further into anarchy. The harrowing echoes of the blind man's screams, the looming shadow of insanity, left them clinging desperately to the last vestiges of their composure. Their reality, once a shared struggle, now felt like a grim battleground. The descent into chaos had just begun. Chapter 45. The Silent Scream. The convulsions slowly ceased, and the blind man's body lay limp and silent. A foggy sheen of sweat coated his face, and the tendons in his neck strained against his pale skin. His mouth opened and closed, shaping the syllables of unvoiced screams, an eerie pantomime of horror. His fingers clawed at the air, twisted into a grotesque ballet of fear. It was as if his terror, deprived of an audible voice, had found its expression in a silent spectacle of suffering. The other participants watched, their breaths held hostage by the unfolding drama. Sarah, her hand still on his forehead, slowly withdrew, her fingers trembling as she wiped away the cold sweat. The room vibrated with an unseen tension, a dreadful silence that was louder than any scream could ever be. Leon, the soldier of the group, fought against his rising panic. His fists clenched and unclenched at his sides as he watched the blind man's pantomime. His eyes were drawn to the blind man's hands, their desperate dance painting vivid images of unseen monsters and hidden horrors. They're not real. They can't hurt you, he found himself muttering, his voice barely a whisper in the echoing silence. His words were not just for the blind man, but for all of them, a feeble attempt to shield them from the engulfing terror. The mood that followed was a slow creep of fear and confusion. The participants, no longer bound by the camaraderie of shared insomnia, now felt the chasm of dread widening between them. Each was trapped in their private nightmare, their anxieties magnified by the blind man's silent screams. The once sterile white room seemed to close in around them, the harsh fluorescence flickering like the dimming light of sanity. Fear, once a looming specter, was now a living entity among them, feeding on their confusion, gnawing at their resilience. The world beyond their sealed bubble was forgotten, their realities consumed by the nightmare that was the blind man's silent scream. Chapter 46. The Pinnacle of Tension. Exhaustion was an undercurrent, a persistent drone in the symphony of their escalating fears. Sleep, that elusive siren, taunted them from the shores of their consciousness. Their eyes, sunken and rimmed with red, darted around the room, flickering between the blind man's contorted face and each other. The once mundane symptoms of insomnia, the lethargy, the sluggishness, the constant fatigue, had transmuted into a heightened sensitivity, sharpening their responses to the unfolding horror. In the silence following the blind man's pantomime, the room seemed to contract, pressing in on them from all sides. The sterile walls appeared to leer, their once comforting familiarity contorting into a mocking labyrinth with no exit in sight. Each tick of the unseen clock punctuated the stagnant air with grim reminders of their shared predicament. Whispers of fear slithered into their minds, feeding off their apprehension, growing fat on their doubts. Paranoia, once a distant specter, now sat among them, a most unwelcome guest. The participants, in their sleep-deprived state, were putty in its hands. Their imaginations painted vivid tableaus of terrifying possibilities. The doctor's true intentions, the repercussions their continued insomnia. The tension was palpable, a looming storm that sucked the air from the room, leaving them gasping on the precipice of despair. A cloud of uncertainty hung heavily over them, its weight pressing down, constricting their chests, their shared anxieties threatening to tip the balance of their fragile sanity. And then the calm shattered. A deafening crack echoed through the room, the sound of something heavy meeting the floor with force. All eyes turned to Mark, the middle-aged man who'd been standing rigid at the corner. His chair lay toppled beside him, his fists clenched and his eyes wide with terror. His gaze was fixed on the far corner of the room, where nothing of interest lay, nothing that they could see, at least. The room held its breath as Mark slowly raised his hand, pointing to the empty corner with a shaky finger. His lips moved, forming a silent word that was nevertheless heard by everyone. His voice, when it finally broke through, was raw and hoarse. We're not alone." The statement hung in the air, its implications far more chilling than the room's artificial cold. The participants stared at each other, their faces reflecting a shared realization. Their nightmare was just beginning. Their prison of insomnia was not their only enemy. Something far more ominous lurked in the corners of their shared reality, hidden beneath the veneer of the sleep study. As the echoes of Mark's words faded into the silence, the participants found themselves teetering on the edge of an abyss, the darkness within inviting, promising answers to the questions that tormented them. And as the reality of their predicament sank in, they could only cling to the fragile thread of sanity that still remained, the thread that was now rapidly unraveling. Their story was far from over. It was only the beginning of a long, sleepless night. Chapter 47. The Birth of Rebellion. In the face of their shared terror, in the echoing aftermath of Mark's revelation, a spark ignited in the collective consciousness of the group. It was a spark of defiance, of the primal instinct to survive, to resist the confinements of their twisted circumstances. Amid the confusion, Lisa, the young woman who had once bravely bared her past, stepped forth, her voice steady and determined, cut through the stale air like a hot knife. "We have to take control. We're not lab rats. We have to take control. We're not lab rats. We need to blind them. The observers, the puppeteers pulling our strings." Her proclamation echoed in the silence as the participants turned towards her. Sarah's gaze held an unwavering determination that stirred a sense of resolve in the hearts of the onlookers. Her idea, foreign and daring, challenged the status quo they had reluctantly accepted. The room buzzed with hushed discussions. Small pockets of participants huddled together, their foreheads creased in contemplation. Sarah's proposition ricocheted around the room, its audaciousness instilling a newfound hope in their hearts. Their fervent whispers, filled with speculations, possible plans, and debates over potential consequences, bounced off the sterile walls, gradually building a crescendo of impending rebellion. Consensus did not come easily. The fear of retribution from the unseen observers was a tangible force, heavy as a shroud over their spirits. But as each participant shared their doubts and fears, they found that the spark of rebellion, once lit, refused to die. It lived on, growing in intensity, feeding off their shared dread of the unknown. The overwhelming need for control, for some semblance of agency in their nightmarish predicament, slowly tipped the scales towards action. Finally, the moment arrived. Like soldiers preparing for an unanticipated war, they moved in tandem, each one assigned a role in this daring act of defiance. They soaked paper towels in water from the cooler, their movements swift and determined. The cold dampness seeped into their skin, a chilling contrast to the fire of rebellion burning within their hearts. One by one, they marched towards the unblinking eyes that had been their silent companions. The cameras, which once invoked a sense of security, now symbolized their entrapment. The wet paper towels slapped against the cold metal, sticking to the lenses like barnacles on a ship's hull. Each successful cover was met with a silent cheer, a spark of triumph flickering in the participants' exhausted eyes. As the final camera was blinded, the room fell into an anticipatory silence. The participants, their hearts pounding with adrenaline and fear, stared at each other, their expressions a mix of trepidation and defiant satisfaction. They were no longer merely pawns in the sleep-deprived game of survival. This was the birth of rebellion, a beacon of hope amid the chaos. A small victory, but one that promised the dawn of resistance in the cold, sterile confines of the sleep study. They had taken the first step in reclaiming control, in reminding the puppet masters that the strings could be cut. The participants, once disjointed individuals, now stood united. Their collective spirit, resilient and defiant, echoed in the newfound silence, ready to face the uncertainty that awaited them. Chapter 48. A collective defiance. As the final camera was covered, the atmosphere in the room shifted palpably. The group held their breath. The only sound in the room was the ragged panting of the blind man, Isaac, his episode having morphed into a silent dread. The participants huddled together in the center of the room, their anxious eyes darting towards the blinded cameras. The silence was thick with anticipation, their collective heartbeat a steady thrum against the cold sterility of the sleep study facility. Then came movement. Like a choreographed dance, they began, their every action a mirror image of the others. Sarah, a once silent participant, emerged as the unspoken leader. She coordinated their actions with a calm precision, her assertive voice slicing through their shared apprehension. There was Leon, a former soldier, his strong hands steady as he covered one camera after another, his face an unreadable mask. Then there was Eli, the philosophy student who turned his analytical mind towards devising the best approach to disable the observing eyes. Everyone, from the aloof artist, Lisa, to the recovering alcoholic, Rob, had a part to play. As they worked together, a bond of camaraderie was forged, fueled by their shared desperation. The participants, once mere strangers, now moved like a well-oiled machine. Their actions were synced in an unspoken understanding, a silent affirmation of their decision to defy. The sight was a symphony of shared defiance, their actions a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. This was not merely a blind act of rebellion. It was a statement, a declaration that they would no longer remain passive, that they were more than mere subjects in a twisted experiment. It was an assertion of their humanity, of their inherent right to control their destinies. As the last paper towel was plastered onto the cold glass of the final camera, a profound silence filled the room. It was a silence filled not with dread, but with a sense of accomplishment, a testament to their collective defiance. In that silence, they found unity. They stood, their bodies exhausted but their spirits invigorated. Each one turned to look at the other, eyes reflecting the same sentiment, a mixture of fear, hope, and resolve. This act of defiance was not merely an attempt to reclaim control. It was a promise they made to each other, a promise to fight, to survive, to resist. The room, once a cold testament to their individual suffering, now held the echoes of their shared rebellion. The conclusion of the act marked a turning point in their journey. They were no longer mere participants in a sleep study. They were comrades in an unsought battle. Their collective defiance against their unseen observers was an affirmation of their willingness to survive, a beacon of resilience in their sleep-deprived ordeal. In that shared act of defiance, they found a sense of power, of control, and as they stood facing the uncertainty of the future, their spirits were ignited with the flame of rebellion, ready to face whatever trials lay ahead. They had awakened a collective defiance, and in it, they found a shared strength that promised to guide them through the dark corridors of the sleep study. Chapter 49. The Unseen Observers. The control room, ensconced in a world apart from the participants, was awash in a harsh white light, a stark contrast to the warmth that had just begun to take root in the study room. Monitors blinking with a cold impersonality lined the walls, each screen a porthole into the controlled environment of the sleep study. But that control had just been usurped. Dr. Lucia Rivers, the lead scientist, stood aghast as one by one, the screens flickered and then turned into murky fields of white, the participants having successfully blinded their omnipresent eyes. Her heart pounded in her chest, the rhythm dissonantly serene amidst the chaotic reality that was unfolding before her. The rest of the team shared her disbelief. There was Tim, the data analyst, his eyes wide with shock. Beside him, George, the behavioral psychologist, was running his hands through his thinning hair, a look of deep consternation etched on his weathered face. Their sanctuary, once buzzing with methodical precision, was now a scene of silent turmoil. Surprise morphed into alarm. Panic began to rise, crawling under their skin, their faces a mirror of the fear gripping their hearts. There was no protocol for this, no precedent for them to refer to. Their subjects, the participants they had been observing and analyzing, had retaliated. The puppeteer's strings had been severed and the puppets were no longer dancing to their tune. Their initial shock gave way to an undercurrent of unease, the gravity of the situation descending upon them. The sleep study had entered uncharted territory, and they were stumbling blind, their compass of control yanked from their grasp. The sterile hum of the control room was punctuated by hushed whispers, the scientists scrambling to respond to the crisis. The control room had always been their cocoon, a bulwark against the unpredictable nature of their subjects. They were the unseen observers, removed from the rawness of the participants' experiences. But now that barrier had been breached. The rebellion had echoed through the cold sterility of their observatory, its impact reverberating through their structured world. Dr. Rivers clenched her fists, her nails biting into her palm, an anchor amidst the storm. Her eyes, a touch softer now, flickered over the screens, over the white fields that marked their defiance. It was a challenge, a gauntlet thrown by the ones they had observed from their detached perch. They were no longer just observers. They had become participants in the unfolding drama, their control rendered seemingly powerless against the collective defiance of their subject. The world they had so meticulously crafted was unraveling, and they stood, caught in the crosshairs of the chaos they had unwittingly set into motion. Chapter 50. The debate behind the glass. In the disquiet of the control room, amid the unceasing hum of servers and the sterile tang of antiseptic lingering in the air, Dr. William, with his hawk-like gaze and iron-gray hair, stood silently at the helm. His weathered face was etched in contemplation as he weighed the implications of the recent rebellion in the study room. A murmur of discussion rippled through the room, the palpable tension giving their voices a sharp, brittle quality. His team of scientists, once the puppeteers behind the scenes, now found themselves in uncharted waters. As they grappled with the unforeseen development, a storm of opinions began to swirl. Should we halt the study? The ethical implications are spiraling out of control, pleaded Dr. Lucia Rivers, her eyes a mirror of her growing apprehension. No, we've come too far to abort now, retorted Tim, the data analyst, his voice strained. Their rebellious act is part of the study now, a natural reaction to their forced insomnia. But it's getting dangerous, Tim, chimed in Dr. George. The behavioral psychologists, their sanity is fraying, their health deteriorating. Are we just going to sit back and watch them self-destruct? The room echoed with his words, a piercing reminder of their dilemma. Ethics and science clashed, a churning vortex of responsibility, curiosity, and apprehension. Each viewpoint unmasked the variegated colors of their priorities and ethical boundaries, their personal and professional concerns clashing in a maelstrom of debate. The air was ripe with contention, a battleground of clashing perspectives where each participant stood firm, fortified by their individual beliefs. Dr. William, hitherto a silent observer of the discourse, raised his hand, a signal for silence. All eyes turned to him, a beacon in the tempestuous storm. His gaze swept over the sea of faces, each etched with varying degrees of concern, uncertainty, and resolve. He recognized the importance of their deliberations. It was not just about the direction of the study, but also about the fate of their subjects, about the human lives that were inextricably entwined with their experiment. Yet he offered no resolution, no definitive path to tread. His silence echoed in the room, a tangible embodiment of their collective uncertainty. As the lead scientist, he had the power to quell their fears or fan their concerns, to offer a course of action that could set their wavering ship back on course. But he didn't. Chapter 51. Who Watches the Watchers? In the heart of the observation room, the scientific team that comprised the backbone of the sleep study stood in the shadow of the unexpected rebellion that flickered across their darkened screens. They had always been the watchers, the unseen observers who held the reins of control. But now, faced with the alarming turn of events, they found themselves embroiled in a whirlwind of confusion and disquiet. Dr. William, the eminent neuroscientist and the study's lead investigator, was a man of steely resolve and relentless curiosity. His reputation was built on his groundbreaking research into sleep disorders. Yet the current chaos was a terrain he had never ventured into before. He was the rudder that was meant to guide the ship, yet the storm was proving too ferocious to navigate. Then there was Dr. Lucia Rivers, the voice of ethics among them. A renowned clinical psychologist, she had been drawn to the study by the promise of a deeper understanding of the human mind under extreme conditions. Her heart, however, wrestled with the moral implications of their work, especially in the face of the participants' growing distress. Tim, their data analyst, was a man driven by numbers and codes. His contribution to the study was critical, providing statistical analyses that would help the team make sense of the chaos. Yet he too found himself battling an internal storm as he grappled with the morale complications, now intruding his mathematical world. And there was Dr. George, the seasoned behavioral psychologist. His involvement in the project stemmed from his interest in understanding how sleep deprivation influenced human behavior. But as the horrifying effects unfolded before him, the intriguing subject became a haunting nightmare. His subjects, once nameless and faceless, had become real, their pain echoing in the sterile silence of the control room. The rebellion had shattered their perception of the study and their roles within it. They had started as impartial observers, but the rebellion had stirred the depths of their conscience, forcing them to grapple with their ethics and morality. Shockwaves of disbelief rippled through the room, splicing into the undercurrents of panic. Was the pursuit of scientific knowledge worth the cost of human suffering? The question echoed in their minds, a chilling reminder of their dubious position. It was as though a mirror had been held up to them, reflecting the stark reality of their roles as not just observers, but active contributors to the participants' distress. The title of Watcher had been a badge they wore with pride, but now it weighed heavily on their shoulders, a tangible reminder of their responsibility for the unfolding crisis. And as the grim realization seeped in, they were left grappling with the discomforting question, who watches the Watchers? The echo of the question reverberated through the control room, a stark reminder of the dilemma that now tainted their groundbreaking sleep study. Chapter 52. The Blind Pursuit of Knowledge. The control room, once filled with crisp visuals of the participants, now echoed with their disembodied voices, offering a chilling soundtrack to the unfolding crisis. Dr. Williams stood at the helm, his fingers drumming anxiously on the cool surface of the console. Around him, his team exchanged nervous glances, their gazes drawn repeatedly to the obscured screens. "We have to rectify this," Dr. Rivers finally voiced, her eyebrows knitted into a worried frown. "We have audio," Dr. William replied, the drumming of his fingers ceasing as he turned to face his colleagues. "It's enough. We can work with it." His voice, usually imbued with calm authority, now bore a slight tremor, a testament to the strain they were all under. But the glint in his eyes remained undiminished, revealing his unwavering resolve to salvage their work. There were murmurs of disapproval. Tim shifted uneasily, his gaze dropping to the floor. Dr. George ran a hand through his hair, a frown deepening the lines on his forehead. They were scientists, but they were also human, and the course of action being proposed was testing their limits. "You're suggesting we continue? Blindly?" Dr. George finally asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Dr. Williams' gaze never wavered. "We continue. For science." It was an eerie echo of an age-old debate, a tug-of-war between the quest for knowledge and the ethical implications it often carried. A scientific endeavor demanded sacrifices, but the question was, at what cost? Dr. William, in his unwavering dedication to the study, was ready to push boundaries, to tread the treacherous path of uncertainty. The others, although equally committed to their shared goal, grappled with the severity of the situation and the potential fallout. And so it was decided. Despite the disquiet that gnawed at their conscience, they continued their observations in the dark, armed only with the voices that filtered through their speakers. They clung to this auditory lifeline, their only link to the participants they had thrust into a disorienting world of ceaseless wakefulness. In the hushed control room, the chilling realization of their blind pursuit of knowledge seeped into their bones, a portent of the ethical minefield they had ventured into. They were not just on the brink of scientific discovery, but also on the precipice of moral chaos. Chapter 53. Voices in the Dark. The control room buzzed with a tension so tangible it almost formed a fog around the nervous bodies that inhabited it. The shadowy room was filled with the ominous hum of machines and the anxious whispers of the team, their usual composure replaced by a disquieting unease. Dr. William glanced at the phone. It was an inconspicuous object, yet it held an extraordinary power. It was their own connection to the elusive entity that funded their sleep study, an invisible puppeteer who pulled the strings from the shadows. "Are you sure about this, Dr. William?" asked Dr. Rivers, her voice no more than a murmur. Dr. William paused, his fingers brushing the cool plastic of the phone. "We have no other option, Rivers. We need to keep them informed." There was a collective breath held as Dr. William picked up the receiver, his usually confident grip now slightly trembling. He punched in the number with methodical precision, his actions mirroring his intent to keep the conversation as professional and detached as possible. The dial tone droned in the background, its consistent rhythm the only predictable element in an otherwise chaotic situation. The call was picked up after a few rings. A cold, detached voice sounded from the other end, the authority's anonymity only enhancing its power. "Report," the voice demanded, cutting through the tension in the room. The conversation that ensued was a dance of diplomacy and caution. Dr. William relayed the events with a clinical detachment, stating facts while carefully weaving in their concerns and suggestions. The authority listened, occasionally interjecting with sharp questions that revealed a keen interest in every detail. Subtly, hints of the hierarchy slipped through. Dr. William, although leading the team, treaded lightly with his words, his respect and fear for the authority apparent. The other scientists watched, their expressions a mixture of concern, curiosity, and apprehension. This mysterious voice on the other end held their fates in its hands, a realization that both humbled and unnerved them. As the call ended, a heavy silence blanketed the room. Each member was left to grapple with the enormity of their situation. While they were the observers in the sleep study, they too were being watched, evaluated. The control room, filled with the lingering echoes of the authoritative voice, seemed less like a command center and more like a chessboard in a grand game of scientific and ethical maneuvering. Chapter 54, Into the Abyss. The chilling detachment with which the anonymous authority reacted to the unfolding events was a stark reminder of the single-minded pursuit behind the sleep study. There was a merciless edge to the voice, a cold acceptance of the surreal circumstances that left the room enveloped in an icy silence long after the call ended. "Continue the study," came the authoritative decree, a judgment as definitive as it was unsettling. The line clicked, the sharp disconnect echoing the decisive nature of the command. The room hung heavy with the unsaid words and emotions stirred by this unanticipated directive. The faceless voice had spoken. There was no questioning, no arguing, only obedience. Dr. William turned to face his team, his gaze moving from one concerned face to the other. His silence seemed to amplify their worries, each passing second a heavy weight sinking them deeper into the abyss of uncertainty. "Then we proceed," he finally said, his voice betraying no emotion. He avoided meeting their eyes, instead focusing on the screen still obscured by wet paper towels. The room held its collective breath, a shared silence that reflected their apprehension. A sense of dread ran through them like a live wire, a silent acknowledgement that they were treading on dangerous ground. Dr. Rivers broke the silence, her voice faltering. "But Dr. William, isn't it ethically questionable to proceed in these conditions?" Dr. William paused, his expression unreadable. "The decision has been made, Rivers. Our task is to observe, record, analyze. That's all." But that wasn't all. They knew it, felt it in the very marrow of their bones. They were diving deeper into the abyss, tethered to a ruthless authority that seemed oblivious to the human cost of their relentless pursuit. An uneasy acceptance seeped into the room. Their reservations, their ethical dilemmas all seemed inconsequential in the face of their stark reality. The study would continue, spiraling into an uncertainty that promised further complications and an escalation of events that would test their resilience and their sanity. They stood on the edge of the abyss, staring into a future filled with shadows and foreboding. The sleep study had taken a sinister turn, and they're heading unprepared into the darkness. Chapter 55, A Troubled Consensus. The words still hung in the air, lingering like a haunting melody long after it was played. "Continue the study." It echoed in their thoughts, reverberating in the uncomfortable silence that filled the room. A cold truth, an inevitable decree. But the acceptance of this command was far from unanimous. Dr. William had retreated to his corner, lost in contemplation, leaving the rest of the team to grapple with the announcement. Their faces reflected their shared apprehension, eyes darting across the room as if seeking solace in each other's shared dread. Dr. Rivers was the first to break the silence. Her normally calm composure was replaced with a distinct tremor in her voice. "This isn't right," she said, biting her lower lip anxiously. "We are scientists, not puppeteers manipulating lives at our whim." "Agreed," chimed in Dr. Beck, his typically jovial tone substituted with a weary sigh. "But it seems we don't have a choice in the matter." The words bounced back and forth in the room, a tennis match of doubts and fears. Questions were asked, concerns voiced. Ethical dilemmas butted heads with scientific curiosity. personal fears clashed with professional duty. One by one, they voiced their apprehensions, their anxieties filling the room. Safety concerns were raised, then swiftly swept away by the swift current of their predicament. There was no backing out, no change of plans. The study had to continue, regardless of the cost. Amid the chaotic exchange of fears and doubts, an uneasy consensus began to take shape. A collective nod, a shared resignation to their fate. They might not agree with the decision, but they were bound by it. As the debate simmered down, the air became thick with the weight of their shared decision. They had chosen the path of knowledge over human empathy, a choice that would push them deeper into uncharted territory. Chapter 56. Behind the facade. The room simmered with an uneasy silence, the lingering remnants of their heated debate hanging heavy in the air. The static from the monitors filled the room with an unnatural buzz, a stark contrast to the stilted silence. It was a tableau of stress, of unspoken pressures, and of looming challenges. A long pause ensued, each scientist lost in the depths of their thoughts, the reality of their undertaking sinking deeper into their consciousness. Then, Dr. Gray, the youngest among them and a rising star in neuroscience, cleared his throat. The hushed conversation that followed was unlike any they'd had before. "We've all got a lot riding on this," he began, his voice hesitant but audible. "But have we ever stopped to ask why? Why are we doing this?" "What do you mean?" Dr. George interjected, his brows furrowed in confusion. "We're here for the advancement of science, aren't we?" Dr. Gray shook his head. "That's what we tell ourselves. But is that all there is to it?" There was an uncomfortable shift in the room, eyes averting, silence stretching. Underneath the veneer of scientific dedication, personal motivations simmered, previously unspoken, now inching closer to the surface. For Dr. Rivers, it was a chance to outshine her peers, to secure her position at the university. For Dr. William, it was about validation, about proving the worthiness of his life's work. Each had their own reasons, their own silent drives pushing them to the edge of their ethical boundaries. In the following hours, the room echoed with personal confessions and the pressure cooker of their collective ambition. It was a purge, an unmasking of the facade they hid behind, exposing the gritty truth of their quest. The higher the stakes, the farther they were willing to go, the more they were willing to sacrifice. The discussion, however, left a lingering sense of unease. With each divulged secret, with each personal motivation, a picture was painted, a portrayal of desperation, of ambition, of dangerous intent. It was a grim foreshadowing of what lay ahead. Chapter 57. The Lure of Success. The control room, once a hub of buzzing scientific activity, had transformed into a confessional. Dr. George, the oldest among them, was the first to share his tale. "I've been in this field for decades," he said, his voice imbued with a rich timbre of nostalgia. His gaze was distant, lost in the labyrinth of memories. "My first experiment was a frog dissection in a high school lab. Since then, my life has been nothing but this, an endless pursuit of the unknown." His revelation unearthed a common thread that wound through all their lives. The pursuit of success, the tireless chase of ambition. It wasn't merely a job. It was a lifestyle, a driving force, a relentless marathon they had embarked upon, fueled by their dreams and hopes. Dr. Rivers, the only woman in the team with a blazing intelligence and passion, followed next. "I had to claw my way into this field. It wasn't a bed of roses, but I never gave up," she revealed. The perseverance in her eyes was palpable, a testament to the years of her struggle. Their stories flowed like a river, sometimes serene, at other times cascading with the rapids of their struggles. Each tale was a testament to their commitment, a testament to the countless sacrifices they'd made. It painted a vivid image of their relentless pursuit, their dreams interwoven with the fabric of scientific advancement. Yet, as each story unfolded, a shadowy undertone weaved its way through their narratives. Fear and uncertainty gnawed at their hopes. The anxiety of the unknown, the dread of failure, the controversial nature of the study, the high stakes, and the potential for catastrophe. It was a dark cloud that hung low over their collective consciousness. Dr. Gray, the last to speak, summarized the atmosphere perfectly. "We're on the edge of something monumental, but every step forward feels like a step closer to an abyss," he said, the gravity of his words resonating within the room. Beneath the lure of success, there was a chilling realization. They were not just pursuers of science, but potential victims of their own ambition, teetering on the precipice of the unknown. Chapter 58. Treading on Ethical Quicksand. Inside the cold sterility of the control room, the air was heavy with introspection. What began as a scientific quest had devolved into a confrontation with their own morals. Dr. Rivers, her usually determined gaze clouded by unease, broke the silence. "When we first set out, we believed we were pushing the frontiers of sleep science," she began, her words filled with doubt. "But now, it's like we're dancing on the edge of an ethical abyss." Her statement hung heavily in the room, each scientist wrestling with their personal convictions. Dr. Beck, his weathered face etched with worry, nodded in agreement. "The line between ambition and transgression is blurring," he confessed, his once assured voice reduced to a tremulous whisper. "I've always believed in pushing boundaries, but at what cost?" Their introspection revealed a jarring contrast. The initial enthusiasm that had once fueled their venture now found itself at odds with the growing dread that gnawed at their moral compass. They had envisioned the study as a grand pursuit of scientific truth, but the unforeseen complications and escalating tensions painted a more ominous picture. Their study was not merely a dance on the precipice of scientific advancement, but also a perilous trek through the murky waters of ethical dilemmas. The youngest among them, Dr. Gray, voiced his thoughts, his youthful energy sobered by the grim reality. Are we on the verge of a breakthrough, or are we pushing the participants and ourselves into an unfathomable disaster? His eyes, usually filled with bright curiosity, now harbored a haunted uncertainty. As the room echoed with their confessions, their moral quandaries amplified the already taut tension. The conversation laid bare the high stakes and immense pressure they were under. Not only did they grapple with the potential fallouts of the experiment, but also with their personal anxieties and apprehensions. Chapter 59. The Unraveling Threads. A sudden stillness descended upon the sleep-deprived participants. The quiet hum of the gas that had enveloped them like an ominous symphony was replaced by an eerie silence. Their senses, already heightened from prolonged wakefulness, registered the change immediately. What had been a latent anxiety transformed into a palpable wave of panic that washed over the room. Shadows danced menacingly on the walls as dim emergency lights flickered to life, their sallow glow bathing the room in a sickly pallor. Participants blinked, disoriented, squinting at each other through the gloom. Their confinement, already oppressive, took on a sinister edge, the quiet only exacerbating their shared terror. The usually collected Linda was the first to voice her fear. "Why did the gas stop?" Her voice wavered, her words reverberating off the cold, sterile walls. Faces already gaunt from lack of sleep turned towards her, their eyes wide with dread. Conversations erupted around the room, a discordant symphony of voices rising in panic. Theories spiraled out of control, feeding the fear that had taken root in their hearts. Rationality seemed to have abandoned them, their words a desperate attempt to make sense of the abrupt change. Jack, a muscular man with a grizzled beard, muttered about government conspiracies and hidden agendas. Beside him, Lisa, a once vibrant artist, was whispering to herself, her hands fluttering as if painting unseen vision. Her blue eyes, once clear and calm, were now clouded with terror and unsettling glimmer of hallucinations brought on by fatigue. The atmosphere teetered on the edge of pandemonium, each participant grappling with their fears, their hallucinations, their desperate will to stay awake. The once orderly room of the sleep study had turned into a pressure cooker of panic and confusion, the collective psyche of the participants unraveling at the seams. Chapter 60. The Ghosts of Sleep Deprivation. They battled against the crushing wave of fatigue with a fierce determination, their minds teetering precariously on the brink of collapse. The once vibrant group of participants had become husks of their former selves, every ounce of their energy channeled into the fundamental human necessity of staying awake. Beneath the harsh, flickering lights of the facility, their bodies swayed like spectral forms, shadows of the men and women they had once been. Eyes ringed with dark circles, blinked with dark circles, blinked with agonizing slowness as they fought to ward off the seductive lure of sleep. Their features, distorted by the harrowing effects of sleep deprivation, bore a haunting resemblance to the worn pages of a dystopian tale. An air of unreality began to pervade the room, fed by the vivid hallucinations that danced before their bleary eyes. The austere walls of the facility transformed under the weight of their altered perceptions, becoming a grotesque tableau of their deepest fears and anxiety. Claire, a usually soft-spoken librarian, began to see a serpent of monstrous size coiling and uncoiling in the corner of the room, its scales gleaming in the dim light. She cried out, backing away, only to be met with vacant stares from her companions, their minds trapped within their own waking nightmares. Across the room, Sam, a jovial mechanic, was muttering to himself, his bloodshot eyes wide as he swatted at invisible insects crawling over his skin. Each participant was trapped within their private world of horror, their realities reshaped by the cruel whims of sleep deprivation. The stark reality of their situation had been stripped away, replaced by the twisted hallucinations of their sleep-deprived minds. The room, once a sterile space for observation, had become a surreal nightmare, a shared stage for their haunting delirium. The participants, once volunteers in a sleep study, had become unwilling actors in a macabre play, their performances a chilling testament to the disquieting effects of sleep deprivation. This eerie tableau set the stage for the impending climax, a testament to the ghosts that lurk within the depths of the sleepless mind. Control room, tension etched into their brows and worry lining their voices. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow on their faces, revealing the raw anxiety etched on their features. The room buzzed with the low hum of their fervent deliberations, underscored by the eerie rhythm of vital signs broadcasting from the monitors. Dr. Mitchell, an older scientist known for his unwavering adherence to protocol, was the first to break the silence. We have to regain control of the situation. This is not just about science anymore. It's about survival. Arguments were thrown across the room like darts, every scientist armed with their fears, anxieties, and thoughts. They discussed potential solutions, always circling back to the central dilemma: how to subdue the remaining agitated participants without further harm. The conversation gravitated towards the very agent that started it all: the gas. The thought of reintroducing the gas to the participants hung in the room like an unwelcome specter, casting a shadow over the group. "We can adjust the dosage, enough to keep them calm but not enough to induce sleep," Dr. Sasaki suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. William, the leader of the project, had been silent throughout the discussion. His eyes were focused on the monitor displaying James's vital signs, but his thoughts were far from the control room. The decision weighed heavy on him. The dire reality of their hypothesis meant a wrong choice could be fatal. With a sigh, Dr. William finally spoke, his voice carrying a gravity that quieted the room. "Turn on the gas. Keep the dosage minimal, just enough to keep them awake but not enough to provoke further harm." His words echoed in the room, marking a defining point in the study's trajectory. Mixed feelings of guilt, responsibility, and fear consumed him. He glanced once more at the screen displaying James's vitals, and the sinking feeling in his gut told him they were venturing into dangerous, uncharted territory. His decision wasn't just about the future of the experiment, but also the survival of the very people they had sworn to protect. Chapter 71: The Resurgence of False Peace. As the clock ticked past midnight, the decision was executed. The gas, their supposed key to a breakthrough, was reintroduced to the study room. The metallic hiss filled the eerie silence, and the room was once again awash in a thin, swirling veil of chemical fog. This wasn't a continuation of an experiment anymore, but a desperate attempt to rein in the chaos they had unwittingly unleashed. From behind the reinforced glass, the scientists watched as the sedative mist settled on the study room, its calming effects visible almost instantly. The erratic movements of the participants started to slow. Agitated voices that once filled the room dwindled to whispers and then to an almost unbearable silence. Like marionettes, they moved, their bodies controlled, their minds entrapped. The gas lulled them into an artificial calm, stripping them of their panic and fury, but not their fear. Their eyes held a kind of defeated acceptance, a surrender to their trapped reality. Sarah, a linguist and the youngest participant, was slumped against the wall, her once vibrant eyes now dull with the weight of the knowledge they had been forced to bear. Nikolai, a mathematician with an unyielding spirit, stared blankly at the room's opaque glass walls, his will seemingly eroded. The room was filled with similar figures: scholars, professionals, and dreamers, now reduced to mere pawns in a horrifying game of survival. As the hours slipped away, the room, once a stage for violent outbursts and desperate cries, had returned to its deceptive state of tranquility. But beneath the calm facade, a palpable sense of terror and danger pulsated. The artificially induced peace masked an underlying dread that seeped into the room's every corner. Just picture the haunting image of the study room, a grotesque tableau of bright, blinking monitors, inert bodies shrouded in chemical mist, and an eerie silence, the false peace echoing the terror of what lay beneath. The tension had momentarily dissipated, replaced by an atmosphere of defeat and desperation, like the calm before a devastating storm. Chapter 72: Echoes of Consequences. The clinical sterility of the conference room contrasted starkly with the emotional turmoil of the scientists assembled within. Sitting around the table, they formed a circle of haggard faces, their eyes shadowed by the weight of their devastating findings. A palpable heaviness hung in the air as they prepared to relay the grim correlation they had discovered. Their conversation was intercepted by a crisp, disembodied voice resonating from the speakerphone placed at the center of the table. It belonged to the figurehead of the project, an enigmatic entity known to them only by a code name, the Conductor. His true identity, much like the scope of his influence, remained an enigma. Dr. William, the lead scientist, was the one to break the dreadful silence. His voice, usually firm and assertive, wavered as he revealed their recent findings. The correlation between sleep and death for the participants wasn't just a hypothesis anymore. It was a bone-chilling reality. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line before the Conductor responded. His voice, cold and emotionless, ricocheted off the sterile walls of the room, leaving a chill in its wake. The scientists listened, their expressions stricken as he coldly instructed them to continue the study. His detachment from the horrifying situation at hand was chilling. There was an undercurrent of urgency in his voice, a ruthless pursuit of data that overrode any ethical concern. His response hinted at a hidden agenda, a purpose that was yet to be unveiled, further deepening the mystery behind the study. Picture the scientists staring at each other across the table, the echo of the Conductor's cold directives reverberating in their ears. Their faces mirrored their shared apprehension and fear, foreshadowing a grim continuation of the study under the shadow of the Conductor's inscrutable intentions. Chapter 73: Waiting for the Unknown. The air buzzed with a tense quietude, following the chilling exchange. The voice of the Conductor had evaporated into the sterile silence of the conference room, leaving behind a chilling echo that settled heavily on their hearts. No one spoke. The room was shrouded in a pall of apprehension, the scientists each ensnared in their whirlwind of thoughts. Dr. Williams stared at the vacant screen, his fingers knotted in contemplation. The gravity of their actions was beginning to truly sink in, pulling him down into a well of guilt. Next to him, Dr. Hartley sat rigidly, her gaze fixed on the impersonal glow of the laptop screen, her mind replaying the horrifying images of the participants. Each of them was lost in silent reflection, their countenances masked with grim realization and encroaching dread. It was as if time had contracted, rendering each moment an eternity as they waited in restless anticipation of the next directive. The soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead filled the silence, a monotone soundtrack to their dread. The digital clock on the wall ticked mercilessly forward, indifferent to the ethical quicksand the scientists found themselves sinking into. Every passing minute was a grim reminder of the torment the participants were enduring at their hands. Through the thick silence, a troubling realization began to dawn upon them. The experiment had spiraled beyond their control, mutating into an insidious beast that feasted on the sanity of its victims. Their initial enthusiasm had faded into the background, replaced by a growing horror at the unforeseen repercussions of their actions. Chapter 74: The Guilt That Binds. Inside the sterile white walls of the conference room, an oppressive silence reigned. A pervading air of regret and anticipation thickened with each passing second, wrapping the scientists in its cold, invisible hold. The digital clock seemed to echo their mounting dread, its relentless ticking a grim metronome to their burdened heartbeats. Dr. William, his gaze steadfast on the vacant screen, grappled with the monstrous guilt gnawing at his conscience. His mind was a tempest of self-reproach and regret. In his quest for knowledge, he had unwittingly opened Pandora's box. The horrific images of the participants, their tormented faces and anguished cries, were seared into his mind, an unfading testament to his culpability. Next to him, Dr. Rivers sat hunched, her once bright eyes now shadowed with a profound sorrow. Her heart echoed a silent apology to the unwitting victims of their curiosity. She found herself trapped in a labyrinth of guilt, the consequences of their actions spiraling far beyond her worst nightmares. Across the table, Dr. Gray stared blankly into the abyss of regret. His usual stoic demeanor was splintered, revealing deep-seated remorse that scarred his spirit. Each heartbeat was a stark reminder of the lives he'd helped shatter. Their silent self-recriminations wove an invisible thread, binding them together in their shared guilt. The eerie tranquility of the conference room was a stark contrast to the raging storm of regret within each scientist. As they looked at one another, they realized with a jarring clarity the irreversible harm their experiment had caused. It was as if a mirror had been held up to their souls, exposing the haunting reality of their actions. The terrible price of their ambition lay bare before them, the corrosive guilt threatening to consume their sense of self. Their moment of collective realization marked a haunting climax to the chapter. Their remorse, a shared burden that would shadow them long after the experiment had ended. Chapter 75. Wrestling with Ethical Dilemmas. The silence was abruptly shattered as Dr. George threw his clenched fists onto the table. The violent echo rebounded off the austere white walls, expressing the frustration and despair none of them had dared to vocalize. "Just what have we done?" he growled, his voice hoarse with remorse. "For what? The pursuit of knowledge. Is that the cost of human life?" The room teetered on the precipice of another silence. But it was Dr. Rivers who snapped the growing tension. "We had no idea it would escalate to this," she countered, her voice shaking. Her eyes, however, bore the hardened resolve of her conviction. Scientific progress always carries risk. We believed the potential benefits would outweigh them. "But at what price, Lucia?" Dr. William interjected, his voice tremulous yet clear. "These were not just subjects. They were humans. We were playing God." Their words hung in the air, naked and raw, each a stark reminder of the complex ethical maelstrom they found themselves in. Their debate ricocheted from wall to wall, the air thickening with the weight of their words, each syllable resonating with the profound guilt, the profound dilemma they grappled with. Caught between the value of human life and the potential scientific breakthroughs their study might yield, they questioned their every action, their every decision. The room echoed with a chorus of what-ifs and if-onlys, an unending cycle of regret and justification. The hour grew late, the artificial light casting long, monstrous shadows that seemed to mock their predicament. Their voices dwindled into exhausted whispers, the moral impasse reflected in their weary eyes. Chapter 76. The Shared Plight. In the eerie calm following their fraught discourse, a creeping realization slithered its way into their consciousness. Like the participants, they too hadn't been sleeping. The first wave of understanding washed over Dr. George. His gaze drifted towards the coffee machine, the crumpled stacks of empty energy drink cans, and the telltale signs of their desperate attempts to ward off sleep. "What is happening to us?" George asked, his words tumbling out into the room like marbles. He looked from one ashen face to the other, meeting the gaze of his colleagues. One by one, the threads of comprehension spun a chilling tapestry. Disbelief was the initial response, a shared denial that bloomed in the pit of their stomachs. Each tried to dismiss it as mere exhaustion, a consequence of the unprecedented stress. But as they revisited their own neglected needs, the mirror of their reality reflected back an unmistakable truth. The cold, gnawing pit of horror began to consume their denial, leaving only a terrifying acceptance in its wake. In unison, they turned to the monitors that had hitherto been exclusively for the participants. Their hands trembled as they affixed the sensors to their own bodies, each beep of the monitor a morbid echo of their shared plight. The machines whirred to life, the graphs revealing the stark reality of their critical conditions. In that moment, the line dividing the observers from the observed blurred, fusing them into a singular entity, victims of a monstrous experiment that threatened to consume them all. The tension in the room grew tangible, a suffocating veil that wrapped around them, pulling them deeper into the shared abyss. Chapter 77. Facing their own mortality. What had been a remote theoretical possibility had now unfurled itself as a sinister inevitability. The irony of the predicament gnawed at the edges of their sanity as each scientist grappled with their potential susceptibility to the sleep-induced death. A vile sense of cosmic mockery hung in the air. The hunters had become the hunted, the observers the observed. Dr. Gray felt a cold shiver snake down his spine. He had willingly walked into the lion's den, believing himself invincible in his quest for knowledge. Now the consequences of his ambition lay bare before him, like a cruel joke at the expense of his hubris. His thoughts turned towards his wife, his young son. He pictured their faces, the pain that would etch itself into their lives at his premature departure. A pang of regret stabbed his heart, his guilt for his misplaced priorities haunting him like a relentless specter. Dr. Rivers, too, was spiraling into her personal abyss. The abstract notion of death she had always observed from the detached perspective of a scientist was now an impending reality. It wasn't her life she feared losing, but the unfinished work, the potential discoveries. Her life's mission, the pursuit of knowledge, was now eclipsed by the menacing shadow of her impending doom. Dr. Williams stared at the monitor displaying his vital signs. He had convinced himself that his actions were for the greater good. But as he stared at the cold, blinking numbers, the weight of his choices settled onto his conscience. He had become a victim of his own experiment, a tragic protagonist in a play of his making. The silence in the room was punctuated only by the erratic beeps of the monitors and the muffled sobs of Dr. Rivers. The invincible walls of academia and research had crumbled around them, leaving them naked and vulnerable in the face of their mortality. Chapter 78. The Inescapable Dilemma. The lab was suffused with an electric current of tension, each scientist caught in the throes of a dilemma from which there seemed to be no escape. Fear was a bitter aftertaste on their tongues, a cold sweat on their foreheads as they grappled with the reality of their situation. They were caught in a dangerous web of their own making, a monstrous experiment that now threatened to swallow them whole. Disagreements and debates ensued, each scientist throwing their anguish, their fears, their desperate hope, into the whirlwind of conversation that spiraled throughout the room. The threads of camaraderie began to unravel, and their unified front started to show cracks under the strain of their collective horror. Dr. Rivers paced the length of the room, her hands clasped behind her back. Her sharp voice cut through the escalating panic. "We need to strategize, not break down. We were scientists before we were victims. We can find a solution." Her words ricocheted off the sterile walls, reverberating in the heavy silence that followed. Dr. Gray, huddled on the floor, his face in his hands, countered. "This isn't about scientific breakthroughs anymore, Lucia. This is about survival." His voice was a mere whisper, choked by fear and guilt. Dr. Williams stared at them, his face a blank canvas, his mind a whirlpool of regret and terror. He glanced at his colleagues, once unified in purpose, now crumbling under the weight of their own doom. "This is our fault, our mess. We have to clean it up," he murmured, his voice almost inaudible against the hum of the machines. The remaining scientists glanced at each other, their faces a stark mirror of the fear and desperation that had overtaken them. They looked away, their gaze falling on the looming monitor showcasing the disturbing vitals. A collective shudder ran through them. In the chilling silence, the echoes of their impending doom rang louder and clearer. The specter of death hovered ominously in the room, a grim reminder of their catastrophic error. They had opened Pandora's box, and now they were forced to confront the monstrous truths lurking inside. Chapter 79. The Struggle Within. The command center had become a battleground of the mind, each scientist locked in an internal struggle as they faced the morbid reality of their experiment. This cold, sterile room, which once was a haven for their scientific pursuits, had now transformed into a conduit of despair. Dr. Gray, the stoic leader, felt the first flickers of panic gnawing at his composed facade. He stood isolated by a window, his gaze locked onto the bone, white moon. The daunting reality of their predicament sent icy tendrils of fear crawling down his spine. The memory of his proud announcement about their groundbreaking study now tasted like ash in his mouth. His heart pounded relentlessly, each beat a loud indictment of his pivotal role in the catastrophe. Meanwhile, Dr. Rivers's despair had dissolved into a relentless surge of guilt. She was huddled in a corner, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. Her breaths came in short gasps as she grappled with her fear. A mother herself, she thought of the participants they had unwittingly sentenced to death. The images of their scared faces, much like her daughter's, haunted her, painting a gruesome picture she couldn't escape from. In stark contrast, Dr. William was entrenched in silence, his face a mask of stoic acceptance. He had known risks were involved, but not the magnitude of the calamity they had caused. His heart echoed with a deep-seated regret. His fingers traced the outline of his family's picture, the normalcy in the photo a harsh contrast to his present reality. His mind played an agonizing loop of the decisions they had made, each choice spiraling them further into this living nightmare. A crescendo of panic was mounting in the room, an eerie symphony of their collective dread. Every heart raced in its own rhythm of despair, and every breath echoed with the weight of their guilt. The scientists were no longer just observers. They had become an integral part of their terrifying experiment. Chapter 80. The Deadly Realization. A shroud of chilling realization draped over the control room as the scientists grappled with the terrifying truth. They were trapped in the very cycle of fatal insomnia they had intended to study. The room, once the heart of their ambitious experiment, now pulsated with a dread-filled rhythm that echoed their shared doom. The monitors glowed ominously in the dim light, casting an otherworldly glow over the scene. They had been watching those screens for days, observing the unrelenting torment of their subjects. But now, their piercing blue glow felt cold, unforgiving, reflecting back the fearful gazes of their creators. Dr. Rivers, standing rigid, was the first to break the suffocating silence. We are in the same boat as them," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Her usually vibrant eyes were clouded with fear, her hands trembling visibly. She had led the team into this abyss, and now her self-assurance had evaporated, replaced by a gnawing fear that clawed at her sanity. Dr. George looked up, his face pale, lips trembling. "What have we done?" His voice cracked, echoing the fragility of their situation. The images of their terrified subjects flitted across his mind, an unwelcome slideshow of guilt and remorse. His desperate gaze flickered between his colleagues, his sense of responsibility overwhelming him. Across the room, Dr. William was statuesque in his stoicism, his face a blank canvas. Yet his eyes hold a different story, a tumultuous storm of regret, fear, and desperation brewing beneath his placid surface. His hands clasped tightly behind his back were the only physical tell of the internal chaos he was battling. The realization marked a critical juncture, casting long, dreadful shadows that danced across their faces in the harsh, artificial light. The once disconnected and impersonal array of dials, screens, and readouts were now grim reminders of their shared plight, the digital heartbeat of a nightmare that refused to end. The scientists had become the architects of their own destruction. They had dove headfirst into the unknown, and now they were paying the price. The dreadful atmosphere felt almost tangible, pressing in from all sides as each scientist reflected on their fateful decisions. This horrific revelation spun a powerful sequence of reflections, unearthing raw emotions buried under the facade of scientific curiosity, creating an atmosphere rife with regret, fear, and desperation. Chapter 81: The Unending Labyrinth. The control room had turned into a labyrinth of desperation and terror. The walls closed in on the scientists as they frantically scoured the ocean of data for an escape route, a beacon of hope within the impending doom. Each monitor became a puzzle piece, each readout a potential clue, all promising salvation that seemed agonizingly out of reach. The atmosphere was saturated with a palpable desperation as they dug into their vast scientific knowledge, conjuring theories, discarding hypotheses, and fervently searching for a solution. Time and again, their efforts yielded dead ends, the labyrinth morphing, growing, taunting them with its unending complexity. Amidst this frenzied search, Dr. Williams' guilt-ridden thoughts ebbed and flowed. Did the ends justify the means? He pondered silently, his eyes reflecting the torment of his moral struggle. As a scientist, he had sworn to push the boundaries of knowledge, but at what cost? His mind was a battlefield, ethics warring against the pursuit of science, his guilt and regret the casualties. Dr. Rivers wrestled with her own internal conflict. Her hand absently traced the outline of a significant spike in their collective heart rates, a grim testament to their shared plight. The weight of the ethical implications of their actions bore down on her, a heavy cloak that threatened to suffocate her spirit. Their collective search for a way out of this self-made labyrinth reached a feverish pitch, the room filled with tense energy that vibrated in their bones. Yet, as the hours ticked by, their dread deepened. A horrifying truth slowly crystallized, a shared realization that their desperate search might be futile. There was no immediate solution to their crisis, no magic antidote, no quick fix. The fate of the remaining participants mirrored their own. They were all marionettes dancing on the precipice of death, trapped in an unending nightmare.